Well, let's go ahead and get started. Hopefully we'll have people trickling in, given the weather. Who knows whether people are reminding themselves how to drive in snow. So, welcome to our February USEAP meeting. I don't believe we have anyone here who is new, so I wasn't going to worry too much about introductions. I do want to open it up for public comment and see if there's any public comment. Okay, I'm going to assume that means there is no public comment. So we'll just move on to the updates. And I know I saw Betsy come in.
She'll be back.
And she'll be back. Excellent. Well, Amy, you've got, perfect timing because you just got all your stuff settled. And so.
My list in the car at the light.
Well, as long as you were prepared. It doesn't matter when you prepared, as long as you did. So if you want to, if you're ready, I don't mean to pressure you into it, but if you're ready to give a Parent Center update, that would be great.
Well, it's our workshop season, so we have, if you go online, we have guardianship, navigating services, IEP, transition. We have tons of workshops right now going on all throughout the Valley. We're having a full day transition workshop next Thursday at Granite District, doing some new workshops about keeping jobs and getting jobs and things like that, all around the transition topic. And then in April, end of April, we will have our all-day Spanish Family Links Conference on a Saturday. I think that's also in Granite. And then just some news for us. Jenny Gibson, who's been our associate director for years and years, is retiring. And she is going to work on some projects still, so she'll be around, but she's retiring from her associate director position. And then we've hired a new marketing and development person part-time. So that is what's going on at the Parent Center. Jenny Dobb. She was a board member of ours and a mom. So, yeah.
Excellent. Thank you, Amy. Betsy, want to go ahead and jump on in?
The Baby Watch program has now, I don't know if I reported this last time or not, oh, goodness, moved back to Children's Special Health Care Needs. They have actually physically moved now. They are in that building. Their interim director is Lisa Davenport, who is one of their employees. She was she has a PhD, I think in child development or something like that. Anyway, but they have opened that position. So that position is now open. She's interim director, and they have opened that position. So if there are people that might be interested in that, that would be a good place to steer them in that director position. So that is open. They have also, the group, the providers have been very active in lobbying the legislature in their requests for money. And they're asking for like a $1.5 million ongoing increase and a $1.2 million one-time appropriation. So they're really trying to be active and lobbying the legislature for more funds. They have had a large increase in the number of families that they're serving and no increase in funding over the last few years. So they're really trying to make up for that. So that's kind of where they are. So any questions about that?
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Voc Rehab? Don't see. No, and I don't see Juvenile Justice either. So if they end up coming in late, we'll just make sure that we do get the updates from them later on. So I guess, Glenna, with, half an hour early, it's all you.
Okay, so We're going to just talk about the State Systemic Improvement Plan, and Phase 3 is due on April 1st, at or around April 1st. I can't remember the exact date. So we just wanted to talk to you about our progress on the State Systemic Improvement Plan. And honestly, it's pretty tremendous, because when I talk to you about how we're doing on other things, you're going to see this is kind of leading the group in making improvement. So when we started on this, we used 2013-2014 data from the SAGE. And if you remember, the SSIP is focused on grades 6 through 8, students with specific learning disabilities and speech language impairments. So percent proficient on that baseline year for students without disabilities was 37.1%. Students with disabilities was 14.9%. And you can see we have a gap of 22.2%. Then we have our theory of action. And here is the original theory of action that we started with. And then I'm going to show you a new one. And the reason that we designed the new theory of action, and I can email this out if you want, so you don't have to take pictures throughout it, is we're really working on making our materials accessible to those with visual impairments, and so we're changing over our materials to meet accessibility standards. So here's our original theory of action, and here is the new theory of action, and you can just see where it's a little bolder in the color, so that there's more variation for people with visual impairments. So just a main concepts with this is that there are 3 root causes that we address. In the green, high expectations and beliefs that students with disabilities should be included in grade level core content, assessment, graduation requirements, and college and career readiness plans. That teachers, both general education and special education teachers, need core content knowledge in math, as well as understand how to provide effective instruction in math through the use of universal design for learning, UDL, and evidence-based practices. I just want to point out UDL is something that has been around for many years. It's very research-based. And now it's included in the ESSA regulations, and so it's been brought forward as kind of a strategy for all students. And it's really about making sure that materials are accessible for all students. And then the last root cause is a multi-tiered system of supports, really making sure that that's available in a secondary setting, looking at infrastructure, scale, and fidelity. All of those items in the middle are the areas that those 3 root causes need to address. So leadership at the school level and at the district level, IEP team decisions, using evidence-based practices, using data to make decisions, working in partnership and collaboration between parents, general education teachers, special educations, and administrators, and students as well. Active engagement of all school personnel, and then really looking at how do we prepare both pre-service teachers and in-service teachers, and are we using funds appropriately? Stop. Every time Emily coughs, it triggers like a sympathy reflex in my throat. So the theory of action is that if we implement improvement strategies around those 3 root causes, then we're going to see an improvement in the proficiency of students with disabilities. Any questions so far? Okay, so the original slide, you can remember our baseline data was that we had an achievement gap of 22.22%, and so our goal was to cut that achievement goal in half over 5 years by increasing 11.11%. So you can see that is broken down into a 2.22% improvement every year. And what you can see is that over the last 2 years, we've made improvement, but not to the 2.22%. We work with 9 LEAs. They're referred to affectionately as the I-9s. So Washington School District, Iron, Alpine, Jordan, Granite, Wasatch, and Davis school districts, as well as Spectrum Academy and Quest Academy. They receive targeted support from State Board of Education staff, and they receive it by including it in their program improvement plans that they do annually as part of RDA monitoring. So right now we are providing tiered support to all LEAs. So with using a multi-tiered system of support framework with universal, targeted, and intensive, we have universal support that we're providing to all LEAs. We're doing book studies with both teachers and administrators and parents. You can see that at the bottom. We're around mathematical mindsets and the Mindset book by Carol Dweck. Are any of you guys involved in any of these? Okay. Sorry, they're going really well. We're also doing a MOOC, which is, remind me what it stands for, open source. It's basically a large open source class. I don't remember what the M is for MOOC, but there's a mathematical mindsets MOOC, and so it's a class that you can participate in online for free. We're also doing webinars, and for the very first time ever in August, we are combining our Utah Special Ed Law Conference with the Utah Council for Teachers of Mathematics. And so there'll be a pre-conference day to the law conference that is around math that everybody can participate in. So we're pretty excited about that. We're also doing a pretty extensive PR campaign around improving expectations and beliefs. And so they have been holding meetings with various LEAs, the I-9s, and we've also done a legislative roundtable up at the state capitol that had great results. So just so you guys can see some of those actions. So let's look at progress. So just overall, SAGE math proficiency for students with disabilities. You can see grades 3 through 8 and then grade 10. So 2014-15, 17.1%. This is all students with disabilities, by the way, not broken down into SLI and SLD. So you can see that we did have an increase of 0.55 statewide. In grades 3 through 8. Grade 10 is on a downward trend still. So 7.9, 7.2, 7.1. One of the reasons for that, and it's by no means an excuse, but do you remember we had identified about those 10,000 students that were not taking a math assessment? We've gotten that down to less than 2,000. And so now we have a whole bunch more students added into that pool who were not receiving core instruction before, and we're seeing the results now. Here is for the SIMR. So you can see statewide, so grades 6 through 8, statewide, you can see at the top, the first year we had 1.6% increase and then 1.24% increase. With the I-9s, the ones who are receiving the intensive and targeted assistance from us, you can see a 1.37 and a 1.13% increase for the SIMR. We're going to break that down a little bit more. So off grade level math courses, statewide, 4.5 and 4.8%. With the I-9s, we're seeing 3.5 and 5.7%. We're also looking at ACT participation. So along with that, along with students with disabilities not participating in grade level math courses, we also identified students with disabilities were not generally participating in the ACT. And so you can see those data here. Across the top is all students with disabilities in Utah. We saw an increase of 3%. Across the I-9s, all students with disabilities, we saw a 3.7% increase. Looking just at students with disabilities in Utah with speech language impairments and specific learning disabilities, we saw 3.5 and then 4.2 with the I-9s.
Sorry, when you mentioned the ACT, I know the registration and accommodations are different for students with IEPs. And I am not familiar with working with an 11th grader when they do this. Are they registering separate or identifying themselves with a disability, self-advocating?
So yes, so we actually have to, teachers, special ed teachers have to register for the accommodations early. It's generally in the fall. And so we have been sending out reminders to LEAs, kind of prompting for that process to happen. We are hearing that it is improving. The ACT allows limited accommodations though, and the state board is in negotiations with them since they're considering going statewide and making this a mandated test, requesting that ACT allow further accommodations. So that's in process. We're also looking at special ed teachers who have a secondary math endorsement. And so you can see the trends. You notice it's a smaller percentage, but we also lost teachers. So when you're looking at the end size of both of those numbers, we went down from originally 4,444 teachers, special ed teachers, of which 11% had a math endorsement, to 4,397. And again, the same thing happened with the I-9s. So one of the things that we have seen, we did a, yes.
Going back to the teachers, going back to the teachers, do we see a decrease in special ed teachers too? I mean, so
Yes.
Is this just kind of following the same trajectory of less special ed in general?
We're seeing fewer special ed teachers. I don't know if you guys saw the report that came out a couple weeks ago about retention in Utah, that we're losing teachers. One of the things that it did show though was that we were retaining more special ed teachers than general ed teachers. And we hypothesize, we haven't had an opportunity to investigate this fully, but we hypothesize that because special ed teachers have a K-12 endorsement, they tend to move across classrooms within a district more than a general ed teacher, and that seems to aid in the retention, is that they have that flexibility, but we have seen fewer special ed teachers. It is still a critical need.
I know that too. The ARL, or not ARL, the whatever it is, the new thing doesn't apply to special ed.
The APT, academic
APT.
pathway.
Yes. Right. Does that have any impact, do you think? Not yet?
No. So the board has a task force that looks at licensing, and they are getting ready to start looking at special ed licensing in the coming months. So that'll be an interesting conversation.
With the math endorsement for special education teachers, is that something that the teachers would contact the state office or the board? Who would they contact?
It's posted online.
Okay.
And it is a specific endorsement for special education teachers around math. If they had questions, they could ask Betsy Unker or Kim Fratto. Becky, thank you. All right, any other questions? Amy?
Is there a trend, the trend for teacher, I didn't read the report, I saw the headline, but for losing teachers nationally too? Is Utah following a national trend for, do you know? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there is a national shortage, and there's definitely a national shortage of special education teachers, but I think that Utah has its own distinct issues relating to teacher retention. that you could find plenty about in the media.
Yeah, well, I have read a little bit of it.
Any other questions? Okay, then I am going to move on to my next thing, if you're okay with that. Okay, so let me pass this out. This is the APR summary, and we looked at it last meeting, so I'm just going to talk to you about changes. Yeah, that's all right. I didn't want to forget to send that. Okay, I'm not going to bring it up on screen because most of this is not new information to you. We looked at it last month. So a couple of things that changed since the last time we looked at it. 3C, we sent out an email to you guys because you did not have a meeting when this came through, but we needed to reset targets for 3C, and that is proficiency, assessment proficiency. And just as a reminder, we reset targets on that because we changed the DLM administration. So we went from a I can never think of this word, and Kim is not here. Throughout the year, Betsy, what's the year? Integrated. An integrated DLM administration throughout the year to an end of year DLM administration. And that changed the cut scores and the results. And it had a bigger impact than we anticipated because when we did the integrated model, teachers could select what students would be assessed on. And when we went to an end of year, it was selected by the program based on the preliminary survey that teachers filled out. And so that changed the end of year results for the DLM and reset our baseline. And so you can see in the second column our data. So math 3 through 8 was 17.6% proficient. This is SAGE and DLM. So when you're saying, that looks slightly different than what you just showed us as part of the SIP, it is because those were SAGE results only. Math 10 was 7.08. English Language Arts 3 through 8 is 15.48, and English Language Arts 10 is 8.5. We used those as our target for our baseline year. And thank you very much for providing input around those targets. We have met, because we used our baseline as the target for that year, we have met the target, but I have to tell you our results are abysmal. This is a great area of improvement needed in the state, and something that this panel is going to want to consider addressing as well. The other change that was made on this, we had two others. Indicator 8 is the parent survey results, and we had changed the survey last year from 40 questions down to about 11 questions, and it went from a compliance-based survey to a results-based survey. And so that reset our baseline, and again, reset our targets. The results overall are good. 79.52 are fairly high. Is as part of a data review, the areas that we did not score as high on are parents report lower numbers of discussions around participation on statewide assessments. We're really confused by that because it's a page in the IEP, and we're finding them, and we're not quite sure why parents don't remember having the conversation. And so that's a concern for us, that there are lower numbers reporting that. An area that we did well on that has been an area of improvement over the last several years are providing information to parents in their native language. That's something that we've traditionally been low on, and that increased pretty significantly. Any questions so far? Okay, the last area that had changed since the last time we had reviewed this is Indicator 13. Indicator 13 is school to post-school transition planning. And you guys are going to remember, because this has been a priority of yours for the last several years, that we kind of have a love-hate relationship with this indicator, where we fall and make it and prioritize it and really stress it and then go back up to higher levels of compliance. So we dropped from last year, we were at 99.75% to 93.11%. So not nearly as low as we have been previously, but this is still a concern. It's a concern not only for the compliance plan, but if you remember, our Indicator 14 results of post-secondary education and employment are on a decreasing trend, and this all ties together, right? When we look at Indicator 13, Indicator 14, and then graduation and dropout rates, which are Indicators 1 and 2. So that is a concern. It's also a concern to me that despite multiple years of sustained priority and professional development, that people don't get transition planning. Right? I mean, this is beyond a compliance issue. It shows a systemic lack of understanding of the idea and philosophy behind transition planning. And that's still a concern in the state. Those are the only changes. Do you have any other questions, though? I don't want to spend a lot of time on it if you don't.
Just one question. With the Indicator 8, how was the return? How many did you have a good return, or?
We had about 22% return, maybe 20.3. Let me see if I can find the actual results for you, though. Down from 40 questions to 13. And I'll let you guys look at it. Can you read it? Is that better?
Glenna? Yes. I have a silly question. Does the survey, when you're talking about in the native language, does the survey go out in their native language?
Yes, so we do send it out. When we get the data back from LEAs with the parents' information, one of the points that we get back is what their native language is.
Oh, okay.
While I try to find the rest of those results and see where they're saved, I have a hard copy. I just don't know where an electronic copy is. Are there any other questions about the APR? So
Just, this is a lack of understanding maybe on my part, but discipline at 0%.
So that looks at disproportionality. So we take the data submitted by the LEAs around their suspensions and expulsions of students with disabilities, and then we compare that to their suspensions and expulsions of students without disabilities to see if it's disproportionate. And then we follow up to see, it's flagged if it's potentially disproportionate, then we follow up to see if it truly is disproportionate, and then that's reported. So the discipline data are actually looked at two different ways. The first way is disproportionate representation, which is a lower standard for indicators 9 and 10, or indicator 4. The other special ed data are looked at the same way for indicators 9 and 10 around eligibility and race and ethnicity. And then we also have to do a review of significant disproportionality, which is not reported in the APR, and we're going to look at those regs today. One of the things that does hinder this calculation is some difficulty getting accurate reporting at the LEA level on discipline data. The issue with that is that there is not a consistent definition around discipline data through special ed and general ed. That's something we're looking at. LEAs also report their discipline data directly to the Office of Civil Rights annually, and it doesn't come through us. So there's two different reporting mechanisms in place. And then there is some lack of understanding and accountability around who owns the discipline data, right? Because special ed has to use it for reporting. And it's also used potentially for safe school. So Carol is working with Assistant Superintendent Angie Stallings and the Student Advocacy Services section, as well as the data people, trying to get consistent definitions in place. We'll be looking at a board rule around this area. So it's definitely an area of growth and improvement for us. I'm G data.
Data Trails 2017. Reports from Susan Wagner. 4 state reports. And 4. And then that report.
Really? There it is. I meant, really? Like, it wasn't a question. Tell her thank you. Okay, here's our parent data. Parent survey data. Oh, look, Amy, I was right. 23.3. We sent out a 6,700 and we received a little over 1,500 back. Display 1 shows you the breakdown on grades of responses. So we do a stratified sample of statewide. So we take our statewide data, and then we have to survey the 5 largest districts that are 50,000 plus students annually. So your Granite, Alpine, Davis. And then we split the rest of the state in half and do it every other year. So then we take our statewide data and mail out surveys to match the statewide data. So like the majority of our students have a specific learning disability. So the majority of surveys go to parents of children with specific learning disability. So you can see our responses there. Display 2 is by race and ethnicity. Display 3 is by primary disability. For the non-respondents, we do follow up with a phone call. And based on other states, our response is on the high level of average based on a response. We heard about another state that offers they send the survey and then they enter the people who respond in to win one of 4 prizes for $100. and I'm a little surprised. I'm not quite sure where the money comes from. It must be state funds. But their response rate is not any higher than us. So we're getting a great deal for our no reinforcement at all for doing this survey. And then here's our results. So you can see, again, high levels, IEP meetings are the questions that relate to that are the highest scoring. Equal partnership is 78.8, procedural safeguard 78.8, and then communication is 74.51. And I'll show you the actual questions. Here's the questions along with how people responded. Number 3 is 81.6, so not horrendous, but the teachers keep in touch with me regularly about my child's progress as an area of improvement. The school explains options I have if I disagree with the special ed process is 86.8. That's interesting because the next question says that their parent rights were explained to them, of which question number 8 would be included. So we're not quite sure what's happening there. And again, not horrendous results, just not as high as we'd like to see. But look at number 10, the IEP team communicates with me in my native language. 98%. Oops. Sorry. Trying to move it up. And then number 12 is the one that I talked about at 82.3%. Participation in state and district testing and teachers communicating regularly. But as you can tell, too, number 3 doesn't specify which teacher, whether it's a special ed or a general ed teacher. So we could be picking up a lot of different responses. But regardless, it's good data to know. That's something that we'll be including in professional development and technical assistance. Any other questions?
Glenna,
Yes.
I would wonder how people define regularly too.
Yes.
Because how is it defined in, like, usually, and I correct me if I'm wrong, Amy, but isn't there a certain period of time where they have to give the IEP progress goals?
Yes.
Send those out?
Yeah.
And is
it's
that
individualized. Yeah.
Do they consider it like once a week I should be getting a progress report, when that's really
Right.
hard to do?
I think that number 3 is something that we do need to improve, though. I'm the parent of 2 children who are not receiving special ed services, but I have to tell you that with both of those children, I've probably been contacted by teachers less than 5 times, and one has graduated and the other one is graduating this year. I think that we've gone to kind of computerized record keeping where parents can access things online and maybe have lost some of the ongoing communication as a result. Because maybe teachers consider that communication. So I think it's good information, and I think that LEAs have the ability to drill into it more to say why would our parents say this. So each LEA gets a report similar with just their data. All right, are you guys ready to move on from the APR? Okay. So the next thing we're going to talk about is the State Personnel Development Grant. And so I have 2 things I'm going to hand out to you. One is the, thanks Maggie, one is the Personnel Development Grant announcement, and the other one, so here's the announcement that's coming, and here are some notes that we're going to talk about. the State Personnel Development Grant, and it actually starts down here in the very corner. So if you look at the corner, there's the title, and then go ahead and flip the page. So a couple of things here. The State Personnel Development Grant we have had on a 5-year basis for the last 15 years. So we apply every 5 years. We've received it, and it's been used for the UMTSS grant, the Utah Multi-Tiered System of Support, working with specific LEAs and providing systems level coaches at the district or charter school administration level. So this announcement just came out about a week ago. You can see February 13th. I'm just going to look the very first column of page 10471, which is just the inside page. I'm just going to kind of prioritize or paraphrase a couple things. So the purpose of the program is to assist state educational agencies, which is us, in reforming and improving their systems for personnel preparation and professional development. What's new in here is early intervention. So early intervention would be preschool services and then getting to students as early as possible. So professional development in early intervention, educational and transitional services in order to improve results for children with disabilities. So then it says priorities. This notice contains 2 absolute priorities and 1 competitive preference priority. So if you go down a little bit, it says absolute priorities. Says these priorities are absolute. So absolute priority 1, effective and efficient delivery of professional development. At the very bottom of that paragraph, in order to meet this priority, an applicant must demonstrate in the SPDIG plan it submits that its proposed project will, and right in the middle, use professional development practices that are supported by a strong theory of evidence that will increase implementation of practices supported by evidence and result in improved outcomes. Number 2, provide ongoing assistance to personnel receiving SPDIG supported professional development that supports the implementation of practices supported by evidence of fidelity. And 3, use technology to more efficiently and effectively provide ongoing professional development to personnel, including personnel in rural areas and to other populations, such as personnel in urban or high-need LEAs. So we have to meet all 3 of those. Then we have absolute priority 2. And then it lists multiple, over the next 2 columns, multiple other requirements. So we have to meet IDA is based on assessment of state and local needs. We have to address shortages, pre-service and in-service programs. It has to be aligned with ESSA and the Higher Ed Act. It has to have a partnership with IHEs, so our Institutes of Higher Education, at least one. It has to describe how we'll work as a partnership. It has to describe the strategies and activities that will be used, how we'll align with our ESSA plan. And then you can see in that other column, right, all of those other requirements, retaining and recruiting teachers. We also have to provide technical assistance to entities that provide services to infants. Going on to the next page, how we'll evaluate our progress. Then it talks about the partnership with IHEs and other partners that we need, which may include the governor, parents of children with disabilities, parents of children without disabilities, people with disabilities, our parent training and information system. You guys as the state advisory panel. The very last column on the next page talks about how we can use the funds. The middle and last column. And on to the next page, the next two columns. We can use the part of the funds to give contracts or subgrants to LEAs or to universities or to our parent training and information system. So our current one has several partnerships with the U and USU, as well as the Utah Parent Center and the LEAs that are involved in it. So that's happened previously. And then starting on page 10474 is just kind of the requirements, the specific requirements of when we submit the grant, what it has to have. So we are in the process of doing a self-evaluation of our data to identify areas of need. And as part of that, we had an external reviewer come and do several meetings across the state with the public. So did any of you guys participate in any of those meetings? Okay, so a couple of you. So we did them. We did 5 across the state in a week's time, and the results of those meetings were handed out to you in this packet. So the first page of that just shows who attended and participated by title. And then the second page shows emerging themes that came out across the group. And you can see personnel development, a multi-tiered system of support on the second page. Then the page 4 shows areas that the group suggested that we focus on moving forward. And page 5 shows information received from the current team that wrote and is implementing the grant that is ending in September. And then the back page shows people who came, they were asked to complete like a question on their way out, and it just shows the results of that on the back page. So Maggie, I'd like to kind of give people an opportunity to look through this and provide some input. And I'm not sure how you want to do that. But the applications are due April 14th. So we'd like to get some preliminary input from the information provided today, and then we'll be following up with email.
Do you want, because we're a little bit ahead on our schedule, do you want to continue going through the rest of what you have listed, or do you want to give people some time, maybe 10-15 minutes to read through this?
Do you want to give them some time? Only because the people that we have coming at the 11 to 3 o'clock slot will probably not be able to come any earlier.
Okay. Okay. Well, why don't we take 15 minutes for everyone to be able to read through this. Then we'll come back together as a large group and maybe decide whether we want to have a whole group discussion about this or if we want to break things into smaller sort of pieces for people to focus on. All right? So we'll come back at 1:15.
Glenna, can I ask a question? Yes. You said early intervention was one of the focuses of this. Is that 0 to 5, 0 to 3, 3 to 5? Do
you know what? I'm not sure that it's defined further yet in here, but you might find more information in here. They are doing several webinars, and I have not had an opportunity to attend one yet. I believe there's one tomorrow. Okay. So I don't have further information yet.
Okay, let's come back together as a larger group. So, Glenna, how do you want us to focus on this?
So I think just input as to areas that the group feels strongly needs to be continued or added to. As I've said, we've focused for many years on UMTSS. UMTSS started with a strong focus on behavior, and you can see that showed up in the input also. And I believe we've talked about it before with this group, but behavior is currently supported only by special education in the state. There's no general ed support. So this might provide a good opportunity to build some cross collaboration across the department. One of the things we did with this grant is we brought the personnel back to the state office, and they're placed in special ed, teaching and learning, and student advocacy services. So it's kind of integrating the multi-tiered system work across departments. And so that might be something that you want to consider. But just things that you would recommend that we include or consider in applying moving forward.
Okay, thoughts from the group? Go ahead, Amy.
I think certainly in our, as we advocate or help support parents, behavior is, and as they mentioned it here, is becoming such an issue. And you're right, Glenna, they're not, the general educators aren't equipped with it, so they defer. There's not often a collaboration. But one of the most crippling things that I've seen, and it's mentioned briefly here, is that there's not good paraeducator support, because often they rely on the paraeducators to either provide that one-on-one support for a certain period of time till they can fade it away, or and without that, the teachers are kind of have their hands tied, and the special educators kind of have their hands tied. So doing something across to all levels, because this behavior is really an area that needs sometimes one-on-one, if not. So that would be my.
And I would say, Amy, too, that is something I hear constantly, is we want more training for paraeducators. We want to have our paraeducators be more, knowledgeable. But there's never the time. It's like to do it, or there's not funds enough to pay them extra to come and do trainings outside of the classroom work that they're doing.
And there's you can't even find them now. I mean, there's even a recruitment and a retention problem. So
yes, so that's a big thing I hear constantly.
Well, and also I think a lot of it goes to, if we don't have funds in order to send paras to any sort of training, then the reliance is on the special education teacher to provide the training. If they don't have the skill set in order to provide that training, they're not doing it. So it ends up being sort of a domino effect that you're not getting what you need. If you're relying solely on just training from the special ed teacher. Other
But
thoughts?
even the special ed teacher that can't, because the para's there during school hours.
Sure.
So there's no even time for them to do training with them. So because they're only there, and that's the requirement from the districts, that they only be there while kids are there.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of changing the subject, I'd like to see more on the early intervention side of things. And I guess where I'm coming from with that is preventative. If we're talking about behavior and mental health being what has been the focus of this, addressing those things in the early intervention levels is very preventative and allows for greater success later on. So the fact that that's been included, I think, is something from my perspective that should be a focus.
And I noticed in there that it said that the early interventions is development of personnel who serve infants, toddlers, preschoolers, and so that tells me it's 0 to 5, since it's saying infants.
I just wanted to emphasize again the paraeducator training. What I have seen in practice across multiple settings, multiple environments, that is concerning for me, that because paras are only there during the school time, teachers would like to train them, but they have the students there. And what ends up happening is the LEA requests that the specific student or students stay home that day while the paras can be trained. So the students are missing out on a day of education and related services and things. So it's a big problem. So if that's possible.
One other thought on that. I mean, on page 6, there's a whole lot on coaching, going back to the paraeducator and the special ed teacher not being able to provide that training and not having the time and so forth. I think coaching is an extremely valuable approach that could be used with the paraeducator as well as teachers.
Coaching at the classroom level. Okay. Christina.
It was mentioned briefly on page 2 about parents, and I feel like that focus on parents could be a little broader, specifically with parent involvement. I know a lot of times, in my experience, we've seen parents who they themselves could benefit from an advocate support, explaining, and we do a lot of parent training nights, but I know that's not the norm in other LEAs. Another thing is kind of going through that specific topics, reinforcing the rights at every, special ed meeting, going the in and outs of the IEPs. I mean, I find myself, even with the same families, saying these are considerations and kind of taking that time. Transition is always a big one, the multi-tiered system of supports. But more specifically, kind of a cycle of information notification. We've run into a few incidents where we do the age of majority rights notification, and then the student gets to 18 and they're like, I had no idea. And it's like, well, we have your signature from 3 years ago. We informed you. And so offering that support and that guidance back to LEAs, because I know the training for administrators was on there, but I feel like that could be a real critical point that could address a lot of concerns that then bleed into transition.
Jennifer.
So this is a little bit in a different direction, but I noticed as I looked through the priorities that one of the things they're really asking for is for all of the plans and programs of the state to be aligned. And I know we've made progress in math, but still are struggling and not having as much success as we want in that area. So I think this would be an opportunity to take what's been working with those I-9 LEAs and take that to the next level or expand it to more schools or something, be able to take those math practices or the 3 root causes and use those as a foundation to build this project as well.
Glenna, I have a question.
There you go.
In our school district, and as I was reading through this and them talking about professional development and training, in our school district, we in 17 of our Title I schools, we have before and after school programs. And those directors of those before and after school programs are highly qualified. However, it's really apparently clear that they need more training in working with the special ed students that they have in those before and after school programs, because that's a huge part of including those students. We want that inclusion in those programs with our Department of Workforce Services grants that we get, and even 21st Century Grant. But I'm wondering if, I know that a lot of other agencies that are not-for-profit agencies do this, but this is our actual school district that runs these programs, and I'm wondering what we do to get those directors and even those after-school staffs a little bit more trained. I don't know whether that's professional development provided by the schools or, I know a couple of them work really closely with our special ed teachers, but aren't specifically trained for that. I don't know. That was just a thought.
That's a great idea. That's another program that we could align with. So,
yeah.
Great. Other thoughts? I'm just going to recap then just to make sure. So behavior, including general ed, paid para-educator training, address early intervention, such as, and I wrote down preventative PBIS, as well as the 0 to 5 age group, coaching of classroom at the classroom level with teachers and paras, parent involvement, transition, MTSS, training for administrators, alignment of state programs, and I wrote down ESSA replicate the work of the CDIT, which is the cross-departmental implementation team, which is what's moving and making progress on the SIP. Expand the SIP from 9 LEAs, and then consider before and after school program professional development needs for working with students with disabilities. Did I miss anything, or is there anything that you feel really strongly about that we haven't covered? Karen?
So you said the training for teachers and paras. What was that one? Is that special ed teachers or regular ed teachers?
So I did not specify. Do you want to specify both?
I think it's important to get the regular ed teachers on board somehow so that they maybe change their mindset that these are all our kids. It's not just, oh, they're special ed, we'll let them worry about that. So I think getting them on board would be an important part of that.
Okay, I've made that addition. Marianne?
I also noticed in there, one of them made the comment about the paras not being paid for their professional development. And I know just from experience in that if that professional development's held after the hours that those paras are paid, that, you know, because most of them are just on certain hours a week so that they're, you know, that keeps them below the insurance eligible and the benefits eligible line. I don't know, can we address that with districts that those paras need to be paid? Because they need that training. However, that's really hard to ask them to come to training and give up their personal time to do that where they're not being paid. So I don't know how you address that.
We could write the grant so that some of the funds are used to pay for paras, and then we'd have to work it out with districts.
One way would be to, and I don't know if this would be the best way, but to hire substitutes for the paras so they could be there during the day and have their training, but they'd had somebody in class. I know one of our local schools does it that way.
Okay. Betsy?
Talking about the training for administrators, it's something that I'm hearing more because we are expanding preschool across the state with the SB 101 and House Bill 96 funds, is that principals don't really, they've had no training in early childhood education, and they are frequently the ones who are doing the evaluations for teachers. So they don't really know anything about it, but they are the ones, because they're the building administrator. So some training for the administrators and building principals specifically on what are appropriate practices.
Okay, so I've got that. So I added a training for administrators, building principals, and include preschool. I also added under coaching at the classroom level, regular ed and special ed teachers. Sorry, I'm eating my candy now. And then under paraeducator training, I put down through collaboration with LEAs and considering hiring of substitutes.
And maybe the preschool part too, working with IHEs when principals are going through these ed admin programs, you know, some kind of, because the likelihood of them having a preschool in their classroom is getting greater all the time.
Okay. You guys feel pretty good about that? Okay, so please just watch. We will send out an email as we start drafting the application, asking for further input. Maggie, are you okay if I move on? Yep. Okay, so the ESSA plan. So we're not quite sure where it's at under the new administration, but we are moving forward on it. And have been working on it. And so what I did is I brought, unfortunately, it's about 36 pages long. So I didn't bring a copy for everybody. I brought 8 copies, and I thought what we could do is do some work in small groups. But what I have is this, it's a matrix with the statute in the very first column. And then the second column is the input we've received already from stakeholder groups. And then off to the right, you're going to see my comments. And most of my comments are who I'm sharing this information with, because there's different work groups. And rather than create, just a reminder, rather than create a special one for students with disabilities, we integrated with all of the other work groups. So I'm showing you the input I have and who it's been shared with. I don't want to dissuade you from seeing all of the things on the front end that have a ton of input and take away your opportunity to provide more input. But I will tell you that just like when you give someone a homework assignment, they start off really strong and then trickle off near the end. And it might be more useful if you were to provide input on the things at the back, which you will see have little to no input on. So I'm going to pass this around and kind of talk you through a little bit of it, but this would be a great activity to work on in small groups during lunch, if you don't mind if we do that. Yeah. So I have 8 copies, so if you guys want to take one for every 2 people. And so if you're okay if I table that to lunch, okay. So while we're yes, Karen?
What's an IHE?
An Institute of Higher Ed. It's a college or university.
I looked it up and it said something about home economics. I'm thinking I didn't think that was it.
Okay, so our next item is around the disproportionality regulations. And so I do have a copy of this for everyone. It looks like this. You guys made me work really hard for this meeting. As we talked about earlier with Laura Lee's question, the APR indicator 4 and 9 and 10 look at disproportionate representation. So disproportionate representation around eligibility by race and ethnicity, as well as discipline. We also have to look at placement, whether there's disproportionality with placement. There are 2 calculations that we do. The first one is about disproportionate representation, and the second one is about significant disproportionality. We actually have about a 100-page manual that describes the processes used for each of those and the calculations. So I don't want you to get stuck in the weeds of this conversation, okay? So the calculation of significant disproportionality is important for several reasons. The biggest one is that it has an impact on LEAs. So to calculate significant disproportionality, we can only look at data. We can't go in generally and do a review of their practices to see if it's an anomaly. And with the data, a lot of times we'll have anomalies with small LEAs of not having an adequate size of the population to do a comparison. Or in rural areas, we'll have where people have foster children or adopted children with pretty significant disabilities that throws their data out of whack, and it looks like they're inappropriately identifying. When there is an issue of significant disproportionality, there's a requirement in IDA that they take 15% of their IDA funds and use them for coordinated early intervening services, CEIS. And that means that you use them for students who are not identified as students with disabilities to provide intensive services and supports, trying to make sure that they don't become identified. But 15% of your IDA funds can be a pretty significant amount. So this has some significant impact on LEAs. So in this document that we gave you, You can see the first column is the summary from the proposed regulations from OSEP around changes to the significant disproportionality calculation. Let me just start by saying, as everything is under the new administration, this is all in flux, and it's supposed to go into effect in a year, and we haven't heard whether that's the case or not. But regardless, it's a good opportunity to identify our current practices and decide if there need to be changes. The second column shows in red text what our process currently is. So, for example, on the first page, it says we have to use a standard methodology to determine whether there's significant disproportionality based on race or ethnicity in the state and in LEAs. So then it's broken down into 4 components. So the first component is there has to be a reasonable risk ratio threshold, and we have to use an alternate risk ratio if the comparison group in the LEA does not meet the minimum cell size or minimum N size. So this is a calculation. What our data show below, and I highlighted it, is we actually use a weighted risk ratio. So this would be a change in our process. We do calculate a risk ratio, an alternate risk ratio, and a weighted risk ratio currently. And I can show you what some of these data look like. They're pretty complex calculations though. So I'll show you in just a second. If you go to the next page, it talks about there has to be a reasonable minimum cell size of no greater than 10, and 10 is our current cell size. The next page is there has to be a reasonable minimum N size of no greater than 30, and ours is not currently specified, but it is at least 10, and we don't have any concerns about going with a 30. D says we're allowed to have a standard for measuring reasonable progress if we use a flexibility. And if you see below in the red text, we do offer flexibility. So we require that for an LEA to be considered as having significant disproportionality, that it be in place for multiple years. And if they show progress, then that does not trigger the significant disproportionality requirement. And so that's laid out there. And you can see we require progress of 0.2 or more. So I'm going to let you look at that, and I'm going to pull open some of the calculations so that you can see what they look like. In the meantime, you guys can see my to-do list. I have 56 items on it. While I open this, it's taking a minute. Will you send me, just cut and paste the input for the SPIDIG, send me an email. Come on. Okay, so this is the data for indicator 9. So you can see we're looking at, we have all of the LEAs, and then we'll have a state total also. But we're looking at the different race ethnicity groups, and they're defined across the top that we're required to look at. And then we look at the number of students in the race and ethnicity group that's identified as a potential concern. So you can see here we're looking at severe school district, and the race ethnicity group that's flagged is Native American. There's 26 students in that group, and then we're running calculations of their risk if you are a Native American of being identified as having a disability as compared to students in other race ethnicity groups. So you can see there's 520 other students with disabilities, and their risk is 11.66%. So here are the calculations. You can see the risk ratio, the weighted risk ratio, and the alternate risk ratio. And what we have traditionally what we have traditionally used is a weighted risk ratio. And what they're asking us to use is the risk ratio, and if there aren't enough students to run that comparison, to use the alternate risk ratio. And so you can see it does flag them slightly higher than what we do, because the final risk ratio is the weighted risk ratio. So you can see if we went solely on data, that severe would have to use 15% of their IDA funds to address this potential disproportionality. What I know about severe, though, is severe actually has a memorandum of understanding with a tribe where they receive all of their students with disabilities and provide services through Severe School District, which bumps up their number and inflates this, which is why we want to be able to use some flexibility in multiple years and to be able to consider issues such as that. Another issue, and actually they're not very high on this one, but they are flagged on others, is Carbon School District has an agreement with Emory where they share their special school with Emory School District. And so when we run the data on placement, Carbon comes up extremely high because of those Emory students. And so what we have to do every year is redo the calculations and reattribute those students to Emory instead of Carbon. Is this making sense? Kind of, okay, like I said, it's kind of a convoluted process. We really don't have concern over using a risk ratio or an alternate risk ratio instead of the weighted risk ratio. When we started this process, it was after IDA was reauthorized in 2004, which is the first time this requirement was included. And so we had to start from scratch and kind of design a system. And now we have several years of implementation and have been calculating the data. So changing moving forward is not a significant concern. Do you guys have any concerns about the way that we use multiple years? Okay. Anything, any other flexibility that we haven't considered that you think we should consider? Do you want me to scroll down so you can see other data? We don't traditionally have people identified under significant disproportionality. We have had in the past, and it was when we were required to do underrepresentation, which was removed. And people were traditionally underrepresented on students with autism in other race or ethnicity groups, because the majority of students who are white have, I don't even know how to say that. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. The majority of students with autism are white, and so we we do typically see some underrepresentation in other race ethnicity groups, but that wasn't the intent of the law. The law was intended to look at overrepresentation, and so we no longer have to report that. But for several years, Salt Lake City School District did have to use a percentage of their IDA funds. So with that, our process is fairly in alignment with some minimal tweaks with the proposed regulations, and we anticipate, unless you guys have any great concern, just making those changes and going with the regular risk ratio and alternate risk ratio. It does set the threshold higher, and so we will flag more LEAs and have to go through further review, but I think that's a good process, right? We definitely do not want to see overrepresentation of students. So we're more than willing to go through that process, and if LEAs are identified, require them to use those funds. All right, with that, I'm going to move forward. The next thing that we're required to do is anytime a special ed rule goes through the board, we're required to bring it to you as the special ed advisory panel. We have one rule at this time going forward. It's not very exciting. It is a charter school special ed funding rule. And at this time, we are not proposing any changes. It's just up for renewal. So I do want to offer you an opportunity to look at that and provide input if you would like to request changes. I'm going to give you an opportunity to do that again over lunch. And then my final activity is just a review of the legislature. And so I have a folder, a packet of the most relevant items going through the legislature. So I thought I would just go through and touch on a few. I'm doing this update for you, for LEAs, and for my staff, so you're going to see several different bills. But the bills that I've bolded have the biggest impact on students with disabilities. Except, hold on, they're not bolded on yours. So I bolded them today. So if you don't mind, I'm going to go through a couple. HB 60 is on page 1. And is pretty innocuous, but it just changes hearing impairment to deaf or hard of hearing. And so our rules will be printed with the hearing impairment because they were approved, but we will be going through and making that change, but not reprinting all 8,000 of the rules that we have yet to receive. So if that passes, we're pretty sure it'll pass. HB 92 is about physical restraint and restricts the use of physical restraint in schools only for issues of safety. Currently, the state statute allows it for safety or property destruction. That rule also removes the ability to use corporal punishment in Utah schools, which was still on the books. HB 125 is around student residency. And I'm not quite sure what will happen with this bill, but what this proposes is that when parents place children across district lines for purposes of mental health or medical treatment, it requires the LEA that the facility is located in to provide education. And that is currently not a requirement. And there's some confusion that when parents place students for treatment of who is required to provide those services. So that's something that impacts us. HB 1, yes.
Question about that. When you're talking about the student is being taken to another location to receive mental health services, are they residing there?
Yes.
In the actual facility?
Yes. So they're not living with their parents. to receive treatment. The reason we actually proposed this issue to Representative Owens, because if a student is in state custody, then they're clearly entitled to services when they're placed in another location. But if a parent retains custody, there wasn't that same requirement. And so I'm not sure that it's the solution, but it's an issue that needs a solution. HB 168, the Kindergarten Supplemental Enrichment Program, will require an entry and exit exam for kindergartners, which will be nice for students with disabilities because we have to evaluate them in preschool. And so it will just give us another data point. HB 223 is a pilot program to put counselors in elementary schools. And I'm just bringing that up because you guys have recommended that counselors work with students with disabilities, and we'll hear more on that today. But anything that gets more counselors in schools, I think, is a great opportunity.
Does that come with funding to hire the counselor?
Yes. Yes, it's a pilot program with some funding. On page 3, HB 305 is an interesting bill, and it may be something that you want to look up and follow up on, but it requires LEAs to have a licensed athletic trainer at each public high school. That's a 4-year program to be a licensed athletic trainer. And you're probably thinking, what impact does this have on students with disabilities? There's one line in the bill that says if they don't have one and they lose a teacher or a staff position, that they use those funds to then hire a licensed athletic trainer. And it doesn't say what type of position. So it could be a special ed teacher leaves, and it would direct the funding to hiring an athletic trainer. So that might be something that you want to follow up on. Federal funds amendments, HB 363, talks about if we receive federal revenues greater than the amount appropriated by the legislature, then there's a process that we have to follow. And so I'm not sure if you guys are aware of this, but every year the legislature has to approve our IDA funding allotment for us to be able to receive it and use it. So that just kind of goes along with that. HB 401 moves the electronic high school. I'm not sure if you guys were aware of this, but the board had decided to close the electronic high school at the end of the school year, and so this moves that away from the board and to another agency.
So,
Yes.
so electronic high school still exists. I thought it was just all gone away since they voted not.
It will depend on this legislative session
Okay.
on what happens to it. HB 404 is an early warning pilot program. And the pilot program, I'm not sure how many of you guys are aware, but an early warning system looks at data that predicts whether a student is at risk of dropping out so that we can intervene earlier. So this is supports that. HB 414 is around USDB, and it requires reporting results of a test for hearing loss to USDB. Doctors, schools, things like that. There's some joint resolutions and House resolutions on there. House Joint Resolution 4, Substitute 1, talks about maintenance of effort requirements. And we have a maintenance of effort requirement of our IDA funds that we're required to budget at or above the previous year's amounts that have been set aside for students with disabilities. And so this is a resolution, but it is a resolution that asks our delegation to address the maintenance of effort calculation federally. House Resolution 1 is around restorative justice in Utah's education system. And I'm happy to talk to you guys about this at another time, but the restorative justice practices are evidence-based and show great practice, so this is a supportive resolution. Senate Bill 1 shows the base budget amendments, and I have not checked it lately, but the last time I checked it, we were seeing an increase in our WPU for special ed. We were receiving state funds for the first time ever for an additional fiscal specialist in the special ed department to help support the use of state special ed funds. And we were seeing an increase in our intensive services funds also. So I'm just kind of holding my breath until the end of the session, because we all know it kind of comes down to those last couple days, right, when things start changing. SB 59, 60, and 61 have had a lot of discussion. Those are all from Senator Davis. SB 59 requires that when parents notify an LEA about a child with a potential disability, that the LEA responds and documents responds within 10 business days. This is for students who might be eligible under IDA and students who might be eligible under 504. The LEAs are concerned about the 10 business days versus 10 school days because of the summer when there's nobody in a school. So that's had a lot of conversation. Senate Bill 60 requires private schools with parent consent to disclose information to school districts for purposes of child find. Senate Bill 61 says if there are funds allocated, then LEAs can be reimbursed for the costs of providing 504 services. So it also requires us to collect data on students receiving 504 services, which has not happened previously. There's quite a bit of confusion about this because they keep writing the bill to say special ed 504, and 504 is not special ed. So lots of confusion and conversation about that. He originally had it written that it would be only for students with autism, and now it says students with 504. But I haven't seen any money allocated, so I think the intent is to potentially pass this, and then if funds are available at some time, to allocate them.
In the bill, they still had the student with a disability with a 504.
No. And I suggested some potential language, and they did not care for my suggestions.
So, Glenna?
Yes.
So, if you had suggestions, would we make suggestions to Senator Davis?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So looking at page 6, Senate Bill 144 is around the Carson Smith Scholarship. And right now the Carson Smith Scholarship is for students with an IEP whose parents place them in a private school. And Senate Bill 144 opens it to students with a 504 plan. So lots of bills about 504 this year. I'm not quite sure what's going on. Going on to page 7, I'm actually not going to talk about any of those. They're more just interest. Those are the main ones that I was planning on talking about. So do you guys have any other questions? Mallory.
With the 504 areas, have they, I've been trying to follow it, but address the fact that a 504 is not required to follow a child from school to school, that it's an LEA decision? Have they been addressing that in any of the talk?
No. And I am actually not an expert on 504 because it's not in special ed. So they ask me lots of questions, and they're always really shocked when I'm like, I'm not really sure. So Senator Stevenson took me to task actually for not collecting data on students with 504s. So that was a difficult time, just sitting there and taking it. Is all I have. I do have the two items that I gave you to consider over the lunch. So input on the rule and then input on ESSA. And Maggie, I would propose, I know the food is there, but we do have the next presenter who's a short presenter, maybe doing that and then breaking for lunch.
Yes, absolutely. I think that would work best. So, Rhonda, are you here? Excellent. So this is Rhonda. She had sent us an email, and we had talked about it at our last meeting as far as having her come and do a presentation on 2 Ears to Learn. And so if you want to come up here, and I will yield the floor to you. There you go. Now you're on.
You said that to me. I'm representing 2 Ears to Learn. Let me give you the backstory. Dr. Russell Griffiths, who is a pediatrician, he's a plastic surgeon for children, so a pediatric plastic surgeon. He developed early on a specialty in reconstructing an external ear. And so he became very familiar with the disabilities of microtia and aural atresia. And microtia simply means an external ear that is underdeveloped, or in some cases undeveloped. And aural atresia means they don't have an ear canal. And so he had done about 10 years ago, he had done an ear reconstruction on a small boy. And when he and his mother returned for a follow-up visit, he had a Baha type hearing device. And that is the bone conducting hearing device, because since they don't have an ear canal or an ear, they can't use a typical hearing aid. Well, the mother was so excited and said that overnight this child had become a conscientious student. He had been a behavior problem before in the classroom and caused the teacher a lot of stress and the entire classroom. But he had transformed overnight once he had this hearing aid. And the little boy was just grinning and said, "I love this thing," because he could finally hear. So, Dr. Griffiths was interested because when he went to medical school, this was not a disability. They thought if you had one ear, it was good enough, just like if you have one eye, you can see everything. But a person with a unilateral hearing loss does have a disability. They cannot filter sound and they cannot identify the source of the sound. So you can imagine what a disadvantage they have when they're placed in a classroom. So Dr. Griffiths became really passionate about advising all of his patients and their families that these children need the hearing device. Unfortunately, all the families came back to him and said they couldn't afford them and insurance would not cover them. So he became, he kept thinking, he came up with a great idea. He gets used devices from audiologists. Very often the audiologist has a drawer full of these devices. When a child grows out of them, they just toss them in the drawer. They can be refurbished, and 2 Ears to Learn refurbishes them and gives them to these students for free. So we're really anxious to help these children, but unfortunately there's a problem. They very often remain unidentified, and for whatever reason, Child Find doesn't always catch them. The children sometimes are embarrassed, and so they grow their hair or they wear a headband or a baseball cap. And if the parents aren't aggressive and don't understand that what a disadvantage the child has, then sometimes the teachers don't catch it. So we have all of these devices that we want to keep giving away, but we need help getting the message out. And we have someone who is working with school districts, but it would be very helpful to have a letter of recommendation from your panel I know that part of your mission is to advise the Board of Education of unmet needs that disabled children have. And this is one that we are really anxious to help resolve. And if we could have some kind of a letter from the panel and or a letter perhaps to the Board of Education asking them to help us disseminate this information. Do you have any questions for me? Okay.
So I'll send you an email so you don't have to remember.
Okay.
But I'd love to get an electronic version of this because I can add it to our newsletter.
Oh, okay.
So-
Thank you so much. A newsletter is such a good way to get the information out to everybody. So I will send you that. Well, you'll send me and then I'll send so I know who you are. Okay.
I do have a question.
Okay.
What is the prevalence rate of this? I mean, it sounds like child find if it's not picking it up. I'm just curious, how often do you see this happening?
Well, we think that there are about 5,000 in the country between the ages of 4 through 10 years of age. So there aren't many. But we really are determined to try to, we're starting in the Northwest. He's in Boise, Dr. Griffiths. We're starting with the Northwest in Utah, and then he really wants to, go to every state and try to give these away, as many as we can.
Have they gone in and talked with primary care physicians? I'm just thinking that obviously educators are going to be seeing these students, but primary care may be the ones who are noticing if there's any sort of physical abnormality or anything like that.
Yes, and there's an organization called Sound Beginnings. Are you familiar with that? They're the ones who do the infant screening. So actually, those people, and I think the name may differ from state to state, but they actually they have these children identified. I'm meeting with the Utah person this afternoon, but they can't give us that information. So we want to make sure that they have our information so they can give it to the parents. Because, of course, the infants have speech and language delays. We feel like the classroom is critical because it's hard on the whole class. But, yeah, we want to help everybody we can.
Any other questions? Excellent. Rhonda, thank you very much.
Lunch beckons.
Yeah, you can smell. It's wafting over everyone. Rhonda, thank you very much for your presentation. I appreciate it. It's information I certainly have not heard of before.
Good.
So thank you.
We want to help. Thank you.
Excellent. So we have some things to do over lunch. So we have homework. But why don't we take 20 minutes to get lunch going, just so that people have enough time to get their food and everything. And then we'll get started having people work in small groups. Again, it looked like we had enough resources to have groups of 2 or 3 to go over that ESSA information, as well as that proposed rule that Glenna handed out. Okay, so I'm going to check in with you guys in about 20 minutes to see how we're doing, where we're going with this. Okay, so we've had some time to eat and chat. Hopefully people are getting done. So we have the ESSA feedback. So if you could get into small groups, make a friend, and start going through it, whether from front to back or, as was recommended, potentially from back to front, just to get some more feedback. And then also that rule update that was handed out as well. All right, we're going to go for about 5 more minutes and then come back as a larger group, sort of talk about the feedback, and then sort of move on with the rest of our agenda items. Okay, let's go ahead and come back. Let's focus. So, Glenna, would you like people to share their feedback? Okay, excellent.
Give me the first couple words in the right column so I can go to the right spot.
Excellent. So you're talking about the left column.
Sorry, the left
In
column.
The other right.
okay, the other right, the opposite right. Okay, so whatever feedback you have, if you could please share that with Glenna so that she knows. If you could start by saying which section you're on, at least with the first couple of words, so that she knows which section you're providing feedback on. So I'll just open it up for people. I'm trying to find our feedback.
Well, is my light on? Yeah, I'll go first for our group. So we talked about the supporting effective instruction section. And I'll pass you my notes so you don't have to try and write everything down. But our overall discussion was about the need for, this section was really focused on training for teachers and administrators and what kind of qualifications and certifications they need to have and what kind of processes both before they are teachers and after. And so we talked about the need for there to be some more training for general ed teachers about students with disabilities and how disability impacts their learning, and more information about like universal design so that the regular classroom is more effectively delivering instruction to students with disabilities. And for regular ed teachers to have a bit more knowledge and information about maybe some of the signs and symptoms that a student might be struggling or that they might have a disability, especially we spent a lot of time talking about secondary schools. So, yeah, do you want to add something?
One of the things we had was general ed teachers being able to respond to or intervene in mental situations like panic attacks.
To know what to do.
To know what to do, yeah.
Thanks for writing that down and sharing it with us, Jennifer. And we're happy if anyone else wants to just do that, like give a quick summary and then give us the written feedback. We're happy to do that.
Excellent. Next group. Who wants to share? Okay, everybody was talking and now you're all shy. It's amazing. Fine, then I will share. So we were looking at the section on the USB as professional standards for paraprofessionals, sort of going back to our earlier discussion that what are the evaluation tools that are going to be used, who's going to be evaluating them, and what sort of professional development is going to be available for paraprofessionals. Again, going back to the previous discussion of if that's going to be something that's going to be an emphasis, then how is that going to be paid for in light of the constraints that are on paraprofessionals with regard to their day?
And to add to that, since you're on that section.
Mike, there you go.
Add to that, since you're on that section, having that professional development more accessible to them. So can they do it online? Can they do it somewhere because they don't have time and they're not getting...
I had a thought on to help with the professional development, not necessarily replace it, but some kind of like a newsletter that would have tips or maybe a success story. Oh, we tried this and it worked, or just so they can kind of keep it in their mind.
Other feedback?
If you have any written down and you just want to pass it over, that would be appreciated. If you haven't written anything down and you're just kind of in agreement with what's there, that looks like what I'm getting from most of you. So thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Was there any feedback on the charter school rule that was handed out?
I had one area for potential clarification, and hopefully I didn't just misreading it in the definition section. On where it says charter school special education add-on funding, and then we're looking down at bullet point B, and it's saying that unless the new charter schools approved purpose is specific to the needs of students with disabilities, would that require some specific definition on that?
I'll pass it on and ask.
Okay.
We might have it defined elsewhere, but I'll double check. Thank you.
Anything else on that?
Okay, are we on to the guiding principles?
Yes.
Okay, so you have a in front of you, NASD's Guiding Principles for IDA Reauthorization. And this is really just for information. But as you guys know, I'm the president of NASD this year, the National Association of State Directors of Special Ed. And we worked with all of the states and territories to come up with this these 7 principles for IDA reauthorization. Now, we are not thinking that IDA is going to be reauthorized anytime soon, and we're not sure that we want it to be reauthorized anytime soon. But I think these principles kind of demonstrate the areas that we think IDA and special education need to be strengthened. And so I just wanted to give you an opportunity to look at this. We have it available, and it can actually be taken and used and customized by states if they want to. So I just wanted you guys to have an opportunity to look at this, and then if you decide you want to do anything with it. I was actually interviewed by an LRP reporter yesterday about this document, and so there should be an article that we can send out once it comes out next week around this. But just so you know, the 7 guiding principles, nothing in here that's probably going to surprise any of you. Unified system, students are general ed, students first, special ed is supplemental. Some recommendations. We think that plans in states should be comprehensive rather than done by departments. We don't think there should be a special ed improvement plan and a Title I improvement plan. Some clarification around MTSS. Number 3 has a small typo that I've asked them to fix. It refers to an IEP as a plan, and it's a program. So that'll be fixed on there. Guiding principle 2 is that every student should be taught and supported by high quality and effective personnel, whether those are teachers, leaders, paraprofessionals, and specialized instructional support personnel. That term, specialized support personnel, comes out of ESSA. So we're attempting to link those 2 laws together. And again, you guys can see foundational beliefs that talk about universal design for learning, which Jennifer and Nicole referenced in their input to ESSA. Guiding principle number 3 is that all students should have access to appropriate assistive and educational technology and accessible educational materials. And what we would really like to do is IDA requires that materials be accessible in a timely manner to students with vision and print disabilities. And we think that with the technology today and the abilities, that actually accessible materials should be available to all students. Knowing students learn in a variety of manners, the fact that they're available digitally already, we would like that to be opened. Guiding principle 4 is around early identification and preschool services. And one of the things that we've asked there is that Part C of the IDA, which is the birth to 3 part of the law, be permanently authorized. At this point, it isn't, and that it be adequately funded. Guiding principle 5 is around a positive school climate. So it's talking about positive behavior interventions and supports, use of restraint and seclusion only for emergencies and safeties, and mental health services, which came up in today's meeting. Guiding principle number 6 is around authentic stakeholder engagement, and it's really engaging people in decision making and moving beyond just opportunities for input. And so talking about the ways to do that, and also asking the U.S. Department of Education, if it remains, to use negotiated rulemaking around the reauthorization of IDEA. And then guiding principle 7 is that really the concept of interagency coordination and responsibility, so that any aspects of education that students with disabilities access using public funds be accessible to them and that they can receive specialized instruction. So again, most of this, a lot of information, but just kind of for your own information. Feel free to change it in any way. Just remove the NASD logo if you do change it. That's all I have, unless you guys have any questions or would like to discuss it further.
Okay. So moving through our agenda, before talking about the youth in custody, I wanted to go back to the presentation that was provided by 2 Ears to Learn, and just wanted to determine whether there was anything that people wanted to provide as feedback, if you felt it was something that was necessary for us to comment on as a panel, et cetera, et cetera. So I just wanted to sort of open that up to the panel for a discussion. Lively bunch. Mm-hmm.
I think it's a good thing. It's good if we could help to get the word out there to let people know about that resource. I think that would be a good thing.
Do people feel this is something that we need to formally comment on, however? I mean, I guess that would be my only concern, is as far as our making a recommendation. I get concerned about making a recommendation about a specific program as part of this panel. I agree, but I don't know that this is necessarily the forum for them to be getting that information out. Maybe that would be something that could be disseminated through whether it's through the Parent Center or whether it's through another organization that can help provide the information resource.
I agree with that. I was going to see if Amy, we could take that back for the e-news or something like that, and we could put it in our resources because it is a nonprofit. The Parent Center can support a project like that.
Could she provide us a little blurb or something about her organization, and then maybe all of us can send it out through our organizations that we're connected with instead of writing an official letter of recommendation?
Sure, absolutely. And I know that Glenna had asked her to provide her with an electronic copy of the materials that she handed out. If she could just disseminate that to us, then...
She's already sent it.
Perfect.
So I'll have Emily send it on.
And then sure, yeah, because I mean, I'm happy to disseminate it within my own classes, and if people have other individuals that they want to disseminate it to, I think that would be perfectly appropriate. I just don't know that it's something that's necessarily something that we need to comment on as a panel. But if people feel strongly, please feel free to interject.
I would agree. I think that's not really our role.
Yeah, we're not marketing. Excellent. Okay, thank you. So the next agenda item is our youth in custody memo, and so that was included. And thank you very much, Emily, for being willing to print that up to me since I gave it to you last night. It was finally when I came out of some sort of nasty flu-induced stupor, I was able to actually write it. So if there's anything wrong with it, then forgive me, because again, I was sick when I was writing this. So I took the information that was provided from our 3 different working groups and sort of combined it together. I know that there was also a flow chart that had been provided by Kathy, and I didn't include that because frankly I wasn't quite sure how to do that within the memorandum sort of format. But what it says, in our role as an advisory panel, we'd like to provide input and recommendations to the USBE to provide services for youth in custody with disabilities, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes just to read through that and then open it up to comments about things you want to have changed, because I actually have the document on my computer so we can edit it as a group if there are things that you want to make sure get added, if there are typos, which it's possible that there are, or anything else. So why don't we take a few minutes and then come back together as a group. So if you could read through that, I'd appreciate it. You know what? I'm actually
Through the LEA student information system, so it's SAS system.
I'm going to actually project.
So through the LEAs.
Okay, so if people have had a chance to look at that, feedback on the memo as written. Yeah, go ahead, Karen.
It says that, let's see, students have the right to promptly be enrolled in school. Enrollment shall not be delayed by safety concerns, lack of records, or for any reason. Safety concerns, define that. Is that safety concerns for that student or for other students that student may be coming in contact with?
Okay.
What?
That's a good question. I was consolidating the feedback from the different working groups, so maybe we need to.
No, we had a conversation one of the meetings, like if there was a student who was a what do you call it? It was a stalker or a, sure, I can't think what the word is, but
specific issues.
It would be important that not that the school they were going to would need to know all of their information, all the details, but they would need to know enough to say this student should not be unaccompanied around this kind of students, or they should be escorted or something like that. So I think safety concerns, saying that we aren't going to pay attention to safety concerns, I think that we do need to pay attention to safety concerns.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I believe wasn't that came up because of conversations we had regarding people's perceptions of students coming in under youth in custody. So it was maybe we could put perceived safety concerns that they weren't.
They were using like the IEP as a reason not to register a kid if they're in JJS because they may be concerned if they're safe, and it kind of pauses them starting. So saying that just because you don't know if they have one and you know they're in JJS, you can't say, we're going to wait to register, because sometimes they'll sit like a whole week in a home when they're placed waiting to register because they're like, well, we don't have all the records. We don't know if they have any special considerations or disability.
I think you're right, though, in the sense that the safety concerns would need to be addressed if they knew of them, but I thought this is when they didn't necessarily know of what
the
was
conversation that I had
going on.
with the group was about somebody who there was a known issue and going into a school, not that the school needed to know all of the details, but they needed to know enough to be able to protect the other students there from situations that might need some help in.
I was going to say, Laura Lee.
I was also going to say, whoa, that was loud. I think the question too is what enrollment means. I mean, if we're talking about enrollment, I mean, youth in a group home setting, the enrollment may just be a school that's right there on site. And when that's happening, it may be, I think the conversation, I remember Lorianne was in here and basically said that they'll sit and have the student just sit and not go to school at all because there might be something. And I think that shouldn't occur. We shouldn't just unenroll a child because there might be something. So I don't know how to best word that, but enrollment doesn't always mean the traditional school either. So we have to, I think when we're talking enrollment, we have to wrap our minds around the fact that that doesn't always mean the high school down the street. That may mean a much smaller school in a JJS setting. It's a secure school in a lockdown facility. So enrollment means a lot of things.
Or a youth in custody class.
Right. What if we just say student enrollment shall not be delayed?
Or say student enrollment in public education. Or is that going to cause problems as far as public-private?
Shall not be delayed.
Because if you just say public education, I think that opens it up to the whole realm, the continuum that you might see in public education, as opposed to saying that school. Okay?
Yes, student, yeah.
In public education, I can do that.
Shall not be delayed, period.
Well, so this idea of safety concerns, does the panel feel as though perhaps that particular phrasing needs to just come out? I mean,
I think it seems like it's open for a lot of
it feels as though that this is creating some consternation in the group, and so I'm happy to just remove it if that's going to be a problem.
Stopping it delayed is good because it does. I mean, these are three very specific things, and there may be other reasons too that are not listed. So stopping it delayed would take care of it, and it would help deal with the fears too.
So students have the right to be promptly enrolled in public education, and enrollment
shall not be delayed.
Should not be delayed. Okay.
I had a question on the first bullet. We talked about it a little bit, but when it comes to UTREX versus the electronic student information system, because all LEA's SIS systems, so that's the student information systems, filter into UTREX. It's not a UTREX or that. It's all go to UTREX. So if we just say through the LEA's student information system. That opens it up to all different LAs that use different student information systems because they all turn into UTREX at some point.
Everyone's okay with that change? Okay.
Is that right?
So-
Is that right? Yeah, go ahead.
I just, so kind of with the area, we took the safety out, which I think because it was interpreted differently was good. However, the third bullet that it talks about, we should have a system in place. I believe we had some confusion last time because the first person that sometimes is the person who determines if the student is getting enrolled or not is a secretary or someone who might not fully understand the IDEA law, and so they're hesitant that way. But also, as LEAs, we want to make sure when that student comes that we are protecting that student from whether it was a not necessarily all youth in custody, but if it was a youth coming from maybe a juvenile center or a situation that there was a possible, we don't want to provide that student the opportunity to be another offend, become, I'm trying to
Offend on another
offend on another situation that's going to hinder them because of their environment. So I think with the third bullet is if we could, I don't know how to clarify it in a legal term, but what I'm trying to say is I do think LEA should be responsible to, and we should maybe address that there, that they should be responsible to train all of their employees not to delay the enrollment of a student. However, if made aware of a situation, like with this flow chart, that they would know how to act appropriately to protect that student, to protect the people who work with the student, and to protect other students. Does anyone have any ideas, or does anyone feel the same? I'm not sure.
As far as phrasing for that, if people have ideas.
I do.
Okay.
So potentially clarifying the recommendation to say that wanting the state to provide specific technical assistance to an LEA in regards to a student coming from who is in youth in custody, and then that can also tie back to listing specific elements, but then that's where we maybe can offer some wording on the safety concerns, as safety to others, safety around other students, and then just offering that guidance to a school, just thinking as an administrator and from this perspective, when we get students in, I mean, it certainly is case by case, so there can't be this set formula, but I think making the recommendation to put out ideas, thoughts, potential, someone mentioned escort, which is something that in my school we use quite often. So items like that, because I imagine in another school who this is brand new to them, those aren't supports that are just readily thought about.
Do you guys get access to like the treatment plans? Like there's school treatment plans that we print out for the youth that are in JJS custody. And some of them, I mean, insecure care, the teachers have access. We give those to them, but I mean, we're in the same place. But if it's a community, if a case manager's coming in, a lot of times if it's a JJS kid, their case manager's coming in to register the youth.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's beneficial or not.
I think for us, again, speaking as an administrator, it comes to that delay. Is we don't have that information initially. Once we have it, then certainly we have very good direction on where to go. But I think and if I could be in misunderstanding it, considering the gap of when that information is not available, then what? And so that's where I would want that clarification on providing that technical assistance.
Okay. So I've sort of rephrased, I'm trying to incorporate this. If I'm not, then please, tell me I'm not. That the USBE should provide technical assistance to LEAs to develop a process by which they identify a student who is eligible for special education services. Maybe we need to say a student who was in custody. Who is eligible for special education services or may be eligible, and proceed with either placing the student in the appropriate location or determining if an evaluation is warranted to ensure the safety of the student, the faculty, the staff, and other students.
Can you read that again?
Right.
Well, I'm trying to project it, but for whatever reason, my computer doesn't want to play well with others. That the USBE should provide technical assistance to LEAs to develop a process by which they identify a student who is in custody who is eligible for special education services or may be eligible, and proceed with either placing the student in the appropriate location or determining if an evaluation is warranted to ensure the safety of the student, the faculty, the staff, and other students, which I don't like where that is at the very end. Because that feels like it's just the evaluation to ensure the safety. So I'm trying to figure out how to rephrase it. I'm sorry, say that again.
Evaluation and plan. So not just the evaluation, but the action part of it too.
So proceed with either placing the student in the appropriate location or determining if an evaluation
or action plan is needed.
Okay.
Or would that be included in the appropriate thing? But I think that tells you that, okay, this student can come, but we need to have a plan in place to support him, to keep him safe and him or her safe and this other student safe, to help them be successful.
What do we mean by location too in the location?
Well, I would assume that means when we're looking at the continuum of services, is that going to be
the placement continuum, right?
So okay, so place it. Okay.
That's removal. Yeah.
So proceed with either placing the student in the appropriate educational setting. Do people prefer that?
Yes, or location. I do.
Okay, educational setting. Okay, so we still are sort of hung up on the safety issue.
I think you don't go there with the safety issue. Because not all of these kids present as a safety issue.
No.
So I think we can stay away from it because people perceive them as oftentimes. So.
Yeah.
Okay.
Could it be that we're listing it technical assistance as in need for an evaluation and a potential support plan? And that's where the safety supports could fall under that. Yeah, it could be under that bigger umbrella.
So to develop a process by which they identify the student, et cetera, et cetera. And then do we want a second bullet point, technical assistance to help develop?
Should probably be its own bullet though. I mean, the TAPs.
Well, this is just technical assistant now. So I pulled out the stuff on safety. But I agree that having something where we start talking about creating that sort of plan is important. I'm trying to determine the best place to put it in a way that makes it still cohesive. If people have thoughts.
I have a question, I guess. I
Sure.
mean, in terms of developing a plan, I mean, when you're talking about youth in custody and care, you're talking about a huge range of things. You're talking about secure care, you're talking about coming out into group homes, you're talking about kids that are just in foster care coming into a school. So I think we're kind of narrowing this way too much into something of fear of safety. And I don't, I mean, I personally, and I know I'm bringing my personal point of view in on this, but I frankly am troubled with the idea of assuming that all kids that are youth in custody and care are a safety concern.
So do we want to say something along the lines of placing the student in the appropriate this is how I can't talk. Appropriate educational settings and providing appropriate educational services, which could take into consideration if we have a student who has potential safety issues. That's something that we're bringing into consideration, but then not singling out that every kid who's a youth in custody is a kid who's going to be a behavior problem or a safety issue.
Yes.
Okay.
But don't bullets 4 and 5 address that placement and that service piece too?
I was like,
seems like we're repeating.
Are we being redundant?
Somewhat.
So the bullet point 4, if the student is entering without special education records and the parent or guardian reports or indicates that the student was in special education in a previous school, this does not alleviate an LEA's responsibility from providing special education related services. Well,
4 and 5 I think might be redundant.
Okay. Suspected as having a disability requiring special education related services. Okay.
Yeah, you can probably combine 4 and 5 together by just saying if the parent or guardian reports that they were in, or if they're suspected, kind of combine the two of those into one bullet point.
Okay, so if the student is entering without special education records and the parent guardian reports / indicates or it is suspected
Yeah.
Or suspects.
that the student was in special education, suspected that the student was in special education.
Or suspected of having a disability requiring special ed, take the language that's in bullet point 5.
Okay. Okay. School. All right. All right. So what I've done with bullet point 4 is if the student is entering without special education records and the parent or guardian reports or indicates that the student was in special education in a previous school or is suspected of having a disability requiring special education related services, this does not alleviate an LEA's responsibility from providing special ed and related services based on the information they have.
But I think
That feels like a
that
big-
statement was saying, though, if the student enters without records, that doesn't alleviate the LEA's responsibility. So I don't if that piece gets lost in that bullet or not, I'm not sure. So saying if a student comes and doesn't have records and they think he was in special ed, just because he doesn't have records doesn't mean he doesn't get the services.
So do we want to take out the suspected of having a disability? This is what group think becomes very difficult.
Well, and so what I like about bullet point 5 is it refers back to that that dear colleague letter that says that to provide the services until the records become available. That rather than not providing services while you're waiting for records, this dear colleague letter flips it, says you provide the services until the records become available. And so that way these kids that are moving around a lot because they're going from foster home to foster home or whatever, for whatever their circumstances are, they're not getting gaps in services while you're waiting for the records to catch up to them. So I actually think the wording in bullet point 5 is more important
Keep it
than
as is.
that does not alleviate
Okay. Because we can keep both. I mean, a little bit of redundancy doesn't hurt. So what I have for 4 is if the student is entering without special education records and the parent or guardian reports or indicates that the student, and I took out was in special education and made it was receiving special education services in a previous school, this does not alleviate, et cetera, et cetera. Are people okay with that? Okay, so people seem okay with 4 and 5. People seem okay with 1. 2 and 3, can I get some feedback on whether people are all right with that? Students have the right to promptly be enrolled in public education and enrollment should not be delayed. That's sort of what 2 is. And then 3, I didn't change at all. Oh, wait, no. So 3 is that the USBE should provide technical assistance to LEAs to develop a process by which they identify a student who is in custody, who is eligible for special education services or may be eligible, and proceed with either placing the student in the appropriate educational setting or determining if an evaluation is warranted. I really wish I could figure out why my computer doesn't want to project this, just because, I don't know about you, but having me just read it to you doesn't work for me.
Well, that doesn't work either for you.
Nothing's working for me right now.
I think it's
Maggie,
away from the safety.
yeah, Maggie, and I don't know if this is just me being a grammar nerd or whatever. The only problem I have with what you just read in bullet point
It's
3
the grammar, isn't it?
is starting with that.
Okay.
That's the only bullet point that's starting with that.
All right, I'll change it. I'll just start it with the. How about that? The USBE.
And then on your last bullet is when you identify what an LEA is, even though we use LEA.
Oh, okay.
So you might want to do it for the first one.
Guys are killing me with
And then we
this.
capitalize special ed sometimes and not always. Though.
Do you want me to see if I can get it to work?
Yeah, I'm putting in the thing, right, the address, and it's just not. It doesn't behave.
I circled the phrase easier.
So thank you for editing for me. So
No HTTP.
no HTTP. Okay, maybe
Just
that's
the
just my
numbers.
problem. All right. So just the BR.
Just no.
Oh, okay, so I did that, and it still didn't want to do that.
7.1.26. And then,
Oh,
okay. Tap download.
well, see, this is why I need technical assistance.
It might be a little slow, but it should be coming.
I was going to say, well, it popped up earlier. and then just didn't want to do it. Okay. Here we go. So it's 3875. Haha! Yay! I feel so much better. Thank you, Emily, for
You probably just have to make it bigger.
patiently walking me through that. Okay. So, and also make sure that you're comfortable with the phrasing on the top. I'm going to go through and change edits that Echo has given me.
I said that special ed if you wanted to capitalize or not. And then that, yeah. The top one's actually fine. Oh, then just you could take it out from down there.
Yes.
Sure. You could put the LEA there. Sure.
Special
Then you
education.
might want to have, well, I don't know if you want to, do you have it capitalized there? Not other places. Whatever you want. Just maybe services capitalized. Or not.
Oh, I didn't capitalize services.
Maybe capitalize special ed in some other spots.
Yeah, I know. It's wrong here. Well, I know, but this is putting it out from a panel, so I've got to make sure.
Student, then the LEA should provide the student.
Which one? Where?
The students. Your last
Oh.
bullet doesn't make sense now.
Oh, whoops. Thanks for catching that. Apparently I deleted something that I shouldn't have. Sorry about that.
You do want to capitalize IEP right there. Just, yeah. IEP.
Okay. See everybody sort of squinting at it. Do you want me to make the bullet points larger? Yes?
Then I would take the special ed not capitalized there because you don't capitalize it below.
Okay.
That would be great. Right? Good.
How do people feel about it? Good to go? Excellent. All right, I will save this and I will send this on. Oh, yes, I guess sorry, Robert's rules. So I will entertain a motion to approve this memo as written and send it on to the director. Do I have a motion?
I motion that this memorandum be approved and sent to the director.
Do I have a second?
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstained? Excellent. Thank you for working through that, and I will send that on shortly. And I will disconnect
You're the best
from this.
chair, Maggie.
Well, I don't know about
You're
that.
the best chair ever.
Okay, so the next, now I've lost my agenda because Echo's putting stuff on my agenda
your
here.
agenda.
She's stealing my pen.
It's yours, not mine.
All right, so we've done the youth in custody. School to post-school transition, Glenna, you're gonna have to remind me what we were talking about with that one.
So,
That was another action item, was that correct?
yes. So, let me look at the notes from last time.
Thank you, because I brought them, I just apparently forgot.
I'm looking for the notes. So I would like to point out Susan Loving has since retired, and Lavinia has replaced her back there.
Excellent,
So
welcome.
this is her first time here. So looking at the notes, you guys looked at indicator 14, and then you also talked about diploma options and provided input around diploma options. The state board has since identified a subcommittee to look at diploma options for students with disabilities. So I'll be taking your input to that subcommittee. I'm just looking at this. It looks like that is all that was discussed. And then you guys specifically asked if more guidance could be provided. So we've taken that to the board. It's part of the same conversation.
Okay.
We're just waiting for the subcommittee to do that work, and then we'll bring it back.
Okay, excellent.
So
then,
Maggie, sorry. So you'll want to have that as an agenda item moving forward, what the task force decides to recommend.
okay. So then progress reports.
Carol
Was here. Yes.
And her phone's sitting here, so we know
She's going to be. Well, in that case, I know that Michelle is here. Did you have an update from Juvenile Justice?
No, the only update, we have a transition to adult living program opening up, I believe set for April 1st. So that's really the only update we have now. So it's more for secure care kids who are transitioning. A lot of the kids sometimes they're 18 and they can't drop down into a group home because they're 18. So now this one helps provide a program. It's right behind, it's right next to Wasatch Youth Center. So they'll be able to transition to adult living from there as well. But that's all I have.
Sorry, you said the location in Salt Lake?
It's in Salt Lake, yes.
Excellent, thanks. And then Voc Rehab? Didn't see. Yeah, wasn't here. All right. Okay. So I guess well, you know what? Since Carol's not here and the school guidance counselor did.
They said they would send somebody, but I told them they probably didn't need them until about 2. So they may not be here for an hour.
Okay.
I'll follow up and let them know that we probably need them in a half an hour.
Okay.
I've sent messages asking if anyone sees Carol upstairs
to push her back down here. In the meantime, while we are waiting, you were given the minutes from our last meeting. If you could go over those minutes, we can check something else off of our agenda item to make sure that those minutes get approved. All right, well, we'll sort of table the minutes then, and we'll. I was going to say, or I can help.
Do you want to do that?
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
And then I'll hurry and log on. There are not enough LRBIs for everyone, but please take one if you need. That's just to kind of also look, if you're not familiar with it and haven't seen it as I walk through that.
Rules, whether they're academic or behavior, but we're really talking about the behavior ones today. And then also to think about from the state level, and you'll see as we walk through here how LRBI aligns as an educational resource with the board-approved 10 effective teacher standards, which teachers are required to be evaluated against in the state of Utah. So that's kind of from the state level. Then going down to a local level with our school districts and charter schools, then they are required to put those state codes and board rules into their local LEA policies and procedure manuals. So that's where also LRBI sets as a resource to help LEAs get those into their policies and procedure manuals. There's also data requirements at that level that LEAs respond back to us, because some of those board rules have data requirements. And then also to think about what are the discipline procedures, what are those practices that are delivered to students on a daily basis from a school-wide perspective to a classroom to an individual student perspective. That then brings us into the practice supports level. That's where LRBI sets. It is a technical assistance manual. So it's a best practice guideline. As part of that, a way to think about that is also LABI helping with the LEAs have multi-tier system support, and part of that practice level is also the amount of professional development we have been delivering since LRBI became a technical assistance manual back in 2015 to both general and regular educators. So let's kind of talk. If you've been around as long as some of us in this room, we will remain nameless, you'll know that LRBI has actually been in existence since 1992 was the first version of LRBI. Historically, it had been just a special education document, but with the newest version of LRBI in 2015, it became the technical assistance manual for all students in the state of Utah, not just special education students. So it was board approved to be that in September of 2015. So a little more than 2 years ago or so. With that changes, there was some new sections added, and I'll kind of go over those with you. But here's really the layout of LRBI. So we have of course, the introduction. The first section of it is state, federal laws, rules, policies, and related to student conduct. Then it goes into what is the research on creating a safe and successful school for all students, effective classroom management, database decision making, individual behavior change, discipline procedures, crisis management, responsibilities as they apply to state level, local level, and to the IEP team. The intervention matrices, which have always been in LRBI, that was really the foundation of the original LRBI back in '92. A new section on emergency safety interventions, which we can give Dr. Echo Cunningham a lot of credit for, because that was a section she worked a whole lot on for us. Additional technical assistance appendix, and then a Q&A section in the back when it comes to specifically ID discipline procedures. So this document, as I said, LRBI, as we revised it, we really needed to take into a strong consideration that it was an educational resource for all educators. So as we pulled together as a task force, we had to say, okay, what are some of those things out there that we need to really keep in mind? One of those being for all educators, the 10 effective teacher standards. As I said, this is a board requirement that educators are evaluated against these 10 effective teacher standards as part of their educational evaluation process. They have this document. Okay. Yes, this is the document that I passed out to you. What I did to help it be a resource for educators is, you'll see on the left-hand side, I listed the standard, the effective teacher standard, and then on the right-hand side, the section within LRBI that would provide technical assistance to you with the implementation of that 10 effective teacher standard. So as an educator, if I'm going through that process, could say, you know what, we've really set as a staff, or my administrator has set for me, for example, really working on standard 3 learning environment or standard 2 learning differences. I could then look at this chart and say, these are the sections that I can go into LRBI that will help me with technical assistance for that teacher standard. So that's just that document. Also, when we started looking at revising LRBI, we had to put some structure to it. And we really looked at the key to all intervention practices when it comes to education is first looking at the environment and how do we structure those environments that they're preventative. Easiest way to deal with any problem behavior, keep it from happening. So how do we do really good structures within our educational environment to keep problems from happening? Prevention of those problems. Instruction, meaning building capacity, and really having a focus in LRBI that if students are making behavioral errors or they're struggling socially and emotionally, that is a skills deficit. And we need to look at that as instruction to build their capacity or a higher skill set socially and emotionally, and not just look at maybe punitive disciplinary measures to correct their behavior. So what will really the instructional building capacity parts around behavioral supports, and then consequences in the sense, not consequences. I think when we typically say that word, you think, oh, that's the punitive things. No, consequences on really looking at behavior functionally. What is maintaining that behavior? What is the purpose of that behavior? And really looking at that section on individual behavior change. So there's processes in there to say, what is the antecedent? What is the trigger of that behavior? What is the behavior, and what is maintaining it? And really then looking at those structures. And as you walk through LRBI, you'll see this is how it's structured. We first say, what are those school-wide practices that are important for all students? What are those classroom management practices? And then what's done at the individual student level? And that's how the document was structured. Also, as we sit down as a task force, we really looked at, say, okay, what are the core principles behind this document? First being that all students can learn and achieve if given the appropriate opportunities and effective teaching. So really having that mindset that we have really focused on in our section in special education, to have a really good mindset when it comes to students' performance, that we need to intervene as early as possible. So small behavior problems don't become major behavior problems. That there needs to be a comprehensive tiered system. So we're meeting the needs of all students on a tiered approach. That student outcome and performance data is so important. That all school personnel in the building share responsibility. I think too often at times we hear, oh, that's a special ed student, or that's one of those kids, so we don't have to worry about it. That no, all educators in the building do share responsibility for the performance of all students, both general and special education students. And the importance of effective leadership across that was really the core principles we looked at when we sat down to revise LRBI. Just then, as far as the purpose, why Martel Menlove came to Glenna when he was our superintendent and said, this document needs to be revised for all students, was really this purpose, that schools face a growing challenge in meeting the needs of students, that we needed a guidance in creating successful behavioral systems for all students, because, as I said, historically LRBI had been for special ed students, but we did not have that guidance for general education students within our state. So really looking at that we needed to really look at supportive school discipline and what was around that. That Utah aims to have good supports for all students, and really a step-by-step technical assistance manual in walking through this process. Section 2 of LRBI is where we went through and looked at what are those state and federal rules and policies related to student conduct. So the sections from pages 3 to 17 walk through all those. And so it wasn't just a big laundry list of codes, because, you know, there's something to help you sleep at night. Forget about counting sheep, right? Unless you're somebody like Laura Lee, then you really love that kind of stuff. Is we broke it down into these sections. First, what were the standards for student conduct and discipline policies? So what had to be in that LEA level policies? What were the prevention of conduct problems? And I think that's one of my favorite sections, and to really think about, yes, both in state code and board rule, LEAs are required to have practices that prevent behavior problems, and really saying we need to focus a lot more on those than these next two areas. One being the grounds for disciplinary actions, including removal from school and consequences for misconduct. Now, this is one place in LRBI where there's a disconnect. Because here's kind of the question. Do you think that all of our state legislation is based on research practices? It's not. So when the group that was responsible for this section started looking at this, and you look at the research on the removal of students from educational services, it does not have good outcomes. So this is a disconnect to say, yes, it does say in this section, and it does say in state code, yes, suspend kids as will, or you must, or you should suspend kids for these types of infractions. But then you'll see when we get to the section on school discipline, that's not the guidance we provide in LRBI. We provide the more research-based guidance at that level. It also goes through when you're bound to notify parents, the training of staff, students, and parents that's required, your evaluation and reporting around student conduct, and then, of course, the federal laws specific to special ed students are in this section. I did the same thing with this document as I did with the 10 effective teacher standards. So you'll see on the left-hand side, it first lists all the 5.3A are the Utah codes that have to do with student conduct and discipline procedures. Then it has the corresponding state board rule numbers, so the R277609. Then the content, and then the last column, what sections then of LRBI provide assistance in the compliance with both that state code and board rule. So that's just another one of those technical assistance documents that I put together to help educators use LRBI as an educational resource. Mainly I use this document when I do a lot of training with district level administrators and principals. Is more so when this document is when I shared. Section 2 really goes into the standards for 2A, standards for student conduct and discipline policies. So for that big laundry list, we said, okay, and I use this as a checklist a lot for educators, or I should say administrators, when we go out and say, lay your LEA discipline policy next to this table and use it as a check box or a checklist to say, can you find these indicators within your current policies? And this is in that section 2A. So it's taking that longer list of codes and board rules and saying, let's simplify it for you a little easier and make sure you can see these things there. Section 3 really goes into effective school research on safe and successful schools for all students. These are the best practice guideline table that was created through NASP. That was the other thing. We didn't need to reinvent the wheel when we put LRBI together. We just needed to go out and find what were the good resources already out there. And as I said, this was a lot of work that was done by the National Association of School Psychs. And so you'll see as you walk through LRBI, there's a lot of references to other organizations, professional organizations that have looked at this work, other websites. There's a great one that's in the classroom management section that was done by the worksclearinghouse.org website on reducing problem behavior. So you'll see there's a lot of other resources provided within LRBI. Section 3A really goes into what is a multi-tier system support. And you'll see that I referenced the board rule R277609 because it does state in that rule that there needs to be a continuum of interventions when dealing with students' behavior. And as I train out in the field on that, I just prompt people on that, you know, yes, this is research-based practices, but it is also grounded in some of our educational policy that you have some of these principles around a multi-tier system of support. 3B gets into what is positive behavior supports and interventions, and it's in that same rule. Back in about, and sorry, I've been here so long, all it runs together. Back in about 2007, there was a state rule passed that said prior to disciplining students, you first had to have a plan to engage and reinforce them for appropriate behaviors. That's the first time we made some changes to Board Rule R277609 to include the 4 basic components of PBIS. So yes, LEAs and schools should be implementing, per this board rule, those 4 basic components of PBIS into their students' code of conduct and practices. The next section 5 really gets into what is database decision making, what are the steps for doing database decision making, and then also gets into what is that problem solving process. So setting back and looking at back to that, what is maintaining the behavior? How do we plan for behavior change? So by all means, there's a lot of text within LRBI. I'm just kind of giving you the highlights of what's in the document, but all means in this section, it really walks you through these processes and how you can apply them in a problem-solving process, both at that school-wide level, classroom level, and student level. Then it really gets into the next section 6 on individual behavior change. This is when it talks about functional behavioral assessments, behavior intervention plans, and procedures to conduct both of those. This has been a shift also when we train a lot of general educators because they hear those terms and think, well, wait a minute, that's just for special ed kids, right? And we have to train and say, no, those are processes for behavior change at an individual level. And there's nothing that stops a general ed student from having a functional behavioral assessment and a behavior intervention plan. Actually, if you think about it, that's the first part and some of those first steps of child find around behavior supports. Because you think, well, what are pre-referral interventions? I have to do pre-referral interventions. I have to start collecting data on that. So when we train on this, we say, and there's some resources in the back of LRBI. I don't think I included them in here. Oh yeah, so here we go. So they're back on page 132, you'll see there's the ABC observation form. I train educators. That is the beginning of saying, what is that ABC process? The antecedent, the behavior, the consequence, start collecting some of that data. It walks through some of that. The other form that I really like in there that I train a lot is this form that's based on the work by Dr. Rob O'Neill at the University of Utah. I think this can be done at that kind of general ed level, moving towards special education to say, how do we start looking at designing functional interventions as part of that student assistance team. So that's why I said individual behavior change, functional behavioral assessments, behavior intervention plans can be done at that early level with general education students. It does then go into a more comprehensive, what we would consider the special ed guidance. Those forms are provided in the back of the document, but we do train folks, don't use those forms. That's just guidance. First, use your LEA specific forms when it comes to the FUBA and BIPs for our special education students. I really like this section and this table. It's the considerations for developing a behavior intervention plan, because too often I see behavior intervention plans that really miss what are the instructional practice or the specialized instruction to change behavior. Too often at times this is how we're going to react to behavior, but we forget the teaching part of that. So that's why we really wanted this section in there to say, really consider that these are the components that should really be in that behavior intervention plan. This is a new section that was in LRBI, and this is the section on discipline procedures. So overall suspension, discipline procedures. Within this, it talks about, yes, we need to maintain discipline in our learning environments, but really looks at what is school suspension, what are the indicators on suspension, setting the stage for alternatives to suspension, and the rights of all students. So this is probably one of my favorite tables in LRBI. It is the indicators on suspension, because I love the first ones. Suspension only works for students who want to be in school, right? And it goes through, and as I said, we looked at the research and said, you know what, suspension isn't effective. And so instead of just saying it's not effective, then we had to say, well, what is setting the alternatives to suspension? And to also prompt, you'll see at the end of this table at each indicator, a board rule that prompts to say, you know what, if we get pushback on, oh, but suspension is what we do, or it's the easiest, and we can't have kids interfering with others, we can say, but wait a minute, you're already should be doing some of these things for setting the stage for alternatives to suspension. So it should not be from starting ground zero, and it gives that guidance. Then it goes in for what are the removal or discipline requirements for all students. And we do give that guidance. We all know in special education that 10-day rule is so important to us when it comes to IDA discipline procedures. But the guidance we give in LRBI is that 10-day rule should really be held to also our general education students. Because we know, if you think about the qualification of special ed students, you get into the having adverse effect on their educational performance or the performance of others. That should kind of trigger that 10-day rule for your gen ed students to think, wait a minute, if they're over relying on suspension to try to change this behavior, we know it doesn't. And that team should really be aware of that 10-day rule for their gen ed students and start going back to let's look at the student's behavior functionally. Let's see about changing. So that guidance is given here as far as looking at those discipline procedures for all students. As we know, IED discipline procedures can get a little tricky. And so we put this table in, or I should say flow chart. There's one way in at the top and one way out at the bottom. And it walks you through the ID discipline procedures and just gives you a nice flow chart on implementing those. So when I train a lot of administrators, because I'm really surprised now that there's only about one university now that requires special education law in their admin programs. So it makes me a little nervous because some of our very good administrative candidates are coming out of school not with a firm understanding of ID discipline procedure. So I was really happy to have this flow chart in there. And when I train administrators, we spend a lot of time walking through this and answering questions on ID discipline procedures. The next section gets into crisis management. This is where we get into what are our emergency safety interventions and what is that cycle of acting out behaviors. This was a new section because too often we see educators make missteps when it comes to the acting out behavior cycle, and they start doing or trying to intervene too much at that peak crisis point. That can hold students there, or that's when you start getting into possibly injuries of staff or students because of misuse there. So this section walks through that. Now this is probably where I get the most questions like, but I thought LRBI was rule versus guideline. And it really gets into the use of emergency safety interventions. There's two that we can do in the state, seclusionary timeout and physical restraint. Now, these are not just bound in special ed rule anymore. These were added to Board Rule R277609 back in 2005 when we approved LRBI. So these now apply to all students, and that you can only do these two interventions when there's immediate danger of injury to self or others. And we've really worked at this legislative session to get the state code changed that then those cannot be used also then for destruction of property. So that's in the process. On page 111, it really walks through what is the definition of physical restraint and then seclusionary timeout. Now, historically, when you say seclusionary timeout, you think of those special designed rooms in special education settings. That definition was broadened to also include general educated students. And those conditions are: a student is placed in a safe enclosed area by school personnel. The student is purposely isolated from adults and peers. The student is prevented from leaving, and I think this is the real kicker here, or reasonably believes they will be prevented from leaving that enclosed area. Now, if that criteria is met, that is considered now in our state seclusionary timeout. It's not just the rooms that were specially designed in special ed rooms anymore. So that's when I say it really does apply to all students now. And that guidance is given in LRBI. On 118, it does give additional phases on the acting out cycle. So what do you do and what do those look like in that situation? In 63, it goes over, as I said, those responsibilities. So what are the responsibilities here at the State Board of Education? The LEA, the IEP team, what is considered informed consent, the implementation and monitoring of behavior interventions, and then what happens if you deviate from a student's IEP or behavior intervention plan. So kind of what are the responsibilities section there. Then it really gets into then section 10, what are the intervention matrices or overview of those research-based interventions. So they are done on the three-tiered approach. So what are those universal interventions, the targeted, and the individual interventions? Each intervention here, I'll show you. This I just pulled the first one. So it happens to be U1, appropriate and motivating instruction. It'll give you what the intervention is, then right under that, the definition of the intervention, steps for implementation, considerations in implementing that intervention, and then you'll see data sources. So if I'm going to implement this intervention, what's the data source I can keep to see if it's an effective intervention or not. So taking it back to that problem-solving process. And then at the bottom of each intervention, because as an educational resource, we also needed it to have additional information on each intervention, you'll see we quoted some references. That's going to either be, sorry, I got to hurry and plug in here, what I refer to as a trade book. not what I would think as like your textbook. We don't want educators to think, well, for more information on this, I really got to pull out my college textbook. So when I see trade book, you'll see a lot of references to the Tough Kid materials by Bill Jensen and Ginger Rhodes. You'll see a lot of references to the work by Randy Sprick. This one, it references the Classroom Instruction That Works book. And then also you'll see references to the Iris Center, and the Iris Center is housed at the University of Vanderbilt, and they're great little online clips for teachers to watch around research-based interventions. So we wanted it to be very useful when it came to those interventions. So you'll see the first tiered level of interventions is what we considered universal interventions, meaning these should be seen in educational settings across the universal settings for all students. These are the preventative, proactive, what you considered the effective educational practices. So within LRBI, there's a classroom checklist that teachers can use around their classroom management. On that checklist, it references a lot of the U interventions, meaning the universal interventions, because they're the research-based good classroom management interventions. The next level really gets into what are the targeted interventions. What are those interventions I should be doing with just a few kids in my classroom? If I have consistency in implementing universal interventions, I should only have a smaller number of students that need these. So like, for example, I should not have every student in my class on a home note, or every student in my class should not be needing peer tutoring or a check-in and check-out program. So that's a way to look at it, is there should be fewer kids at this level. Then the last level is the individual intervention level. This is where we start prompting PLC and student assistant team level. This is that top tiered intervention, and it really should be a team-based approach at this level. So we should plan for that student. What universals are they getting? What targeted and what individual interventions they might need? And we train really closely on that, because we never want educators to think, oh, I'm writing behavior intervention plan and I only need to include individual interventions. Students should be getting assistance across that continuum of behavioral supports. In the additional technical assistance section, this is where you'll find additional references on all your methods of data collection. So in the interventions matrix, if we say do a duration or a latency count, and you're not sure what that means, this is where you can go to and say, oh, I understand now what type of data collection that is, and then that form is also found in the back of the book. This is where it goes into more depth on conducting a functional behavioral assessment, more so in the depth that you would do at an IDA level. It talks about what is duty to warn, and then also that information in addition on that phases of the crisis cycle. And then in the appendix from page 122 to 155, this is where you'll find all of the forms or resources or documents that we reference within the LRBI is within this section for educators to have right at their fingertips. So they don't have to go out and find, per se, like a behavior graphing form, or they don't have to find a seclusionary timeout log or a restraint log or a crisis management plan or things of those natures. It's already in the document for them to use. So there we go. Questions? Was it? No, I just hit it. It went off. No, I got it plugged in. Yes, I was that good, Jennifer.
Could we get an electronic copy of your presentation?
Yes, I'm going to send it to Emily right now, and it will be posted on the web.
Perfect.
Yes, Amy.
So
I'll do that as we speak.
How do you get this information to the principals? Are you invited? Are you inviting yourself? Or is it through the district? I mean, because obviously in helping families, I mean, sometimes it's evident when this is working, and sometimes it's evident that they don't really practice this too much.
So you have to remember that we have an issue is that this is a general ed rule, and so it can't be driven by special ed support. So Carol does provide lots of technical assistance and professional development, and we're working with the director of the Student Advocacy Services and the superintendency to identify support on the general ed side for that. So it's in process and it could be improved.
And I did conduct a lot of training for going to being gracious. A lot of training that was not just special ed focused last year and into this year. I've probably trained more general ed folks and administrators. It really has been word of the mouth, and I was going to say the districts that I think have done really good work with it is I have trained all of the administrators in Washington City School District and all the administrators in Canyons School District. And I'm trying to think, Joel is Cache School District. And then a lot of like school folks also, not just administrators. And Dr. Echo Cunningham is gracious enough to do 2 sessions for us at the CEC conference on Friday, and has done also trainings at the CCBD conference. So we try to also hit conferences that people are already at.
Just from a personnel preparation standpoint, is this something that people who are getting an administrative license, are they getting any of this information in their coursework? I mean, I know we talk about it in special education, and so I'm hitting both general educators and special educators talking about these different processes, and they have to take data and all these other things. But I'm just curious, since administrators are going to be the ones who are going to be providing a lot of support, if that's being incorporated within their curriculum.
Not being from an institute of higher ed, I can't really speak to that. I could say I sure hope so, but I don't know for sure.
It's something that we could take to the education deans. But again, having somebody on the general ed side champion it, because we can go and say, this isn't just about students with disabilities, and they look at us and think it's just about students with disabilities. So it's an ongoing issue. It's the same issue I have with House Bill 92, which is about all students, and everyone, because I'm the one talking about it, everyone thinks it's just students with disabilities.
Other questions?
The bill sponsor says.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm just texting your next presenter. Other questions? No, we're good. Okay.
Excellent, thank you.
And I'm sending this to Emily right now, so you have it.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, so
there she is.
Perfect. Excellent timing.
So this was a follow-up on your previous input, and I'm not sure if it's something you guys want to do further input on or not, but that may be something you wish to consider.
I can introduce myself. I like karaoke. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Lillian Sosi Jensen. I'm an educational coordinator here in the agency. I oversee school counseling, equity, and prevention. I had the privilege to speak with this group a few years ago. I don't know if any of you were members at that time. At that time, I was a counseling specialist and talked about the role of school counseling, and from that, we had a great conversation. I have specialists that oversee school counseling now, but each one of them are busy today, so I get this great opportunity to speak to you and be able to address your concerns. In a review of this memo that was dated in April of 2015, the advisory panel was looking at input and recommendations. I don't know if you have that in front of you, but let me just kind of briefly go over a few of these. Oh, lovely. Thank you, Glenna. And again, I apologize, or should I say again, but let me apologize because I have this cold.
They've been listening to me.
I should have brought some water down.
We'll get you a bottle of water. Oh. I was going to say, this one hasn't been opened. Are you sure? Is that fine? Thank you. You're so kind. I was dealing with the crisis right before I came down and was told to come down, or else I'm usually more prepared. So let me just grab this drink. I love how you guys all take care of everyone.
It's in our nature.
I know, huh? So as you can see, as Glenna brings this up, there were 7 recommendations around the work of access for students with disabilities. The first bullet point being that students with disabilities should have access to school counselors, much like their peers, and receive guidance from the school counselors regarding any kind of post-secondary information, including scholarship, technical schools, and college opportunities. I think instead of addressing each one, let me just go through and just outline this quickly and then talk to them in general. School counselors should provide information to students with disabilities and their parents on college resource centers centers for people with disabilities and other community resources for parents. Collaboration, the third one, collaboration with special ed teachers, school counselors, transition specialists, and others who can put together post-school programs that encourage college and career readiness to benefit students with disabilities. Train school counselors on needs of students with disabilities regarding college and career opportunities, and have USBE provide guidance to districts and counseling departments on the responsibilities for students with disabilities. The next one is then USBE to collect and provide resources and information for counselors to share with parents of students with disabilities, future opportunities for their students, and consistent across the state and by community. The last one, collaboration with school counseling, transition specialists, Evoke Rehab, resource teachers, etc., to develop a more comprehensive transition plan for students with disabilities. So over the last few years, we have tried to be more diligent in our efforts. I'm going to start back to when I addressed this group a few years ago, that in school counseling, we perform, and I say we, USBE, performs audits of each of the school counseling programs at a secondary level. We're very limited when it comes to access for elementary school counselors, and our board rule is management over secondary, and I think most of this is around that post-secondary attainment for students with disabilities as well, so it ties into this. But in the audit, we go through 12 standards. They've now been condensed to assurances so that they become more consistent across the state. So there are standards and indicators for the management for students, and we've made a very concerted effort in our audits to make sure that students with disabilities are included and to give them guidelines and suggestions as we do these audits. In the last 2 years, I don't know that we have covered all of the secondary schools because it's a rotation of every 6 years. I would dare say we're about 2/3 through that are getting more of this concerted effort. And we have also changed some language in here to make sure that counselors are providing a more depth in in-house service to students with disabilities. I dare say, and I don't want this to be the default answer, is that it looks different per LEA and across the state. I think that where you would like to see this go, as well as myself, is that the design principle intent would be more consistent across the state for all students, with the emphasis with students with disabilities. So in our recommendations and languages, we have asked them to track the data, and the data looking at, in most cases, as we've visited the secondary schools, is some of the students that are falling behind their peers are students with disabilities. So what they do is an activity or tiered intervention, track data, and help provide additional supports through tiered interventions for their students with disabilities. So is it exactly where we would like it to be? I think we're about 2/3 there. As I said, we've made a concerted effort, but we've not been able to visit all of the secondary schools in the last 2 years because of the rotation.
We're very fortunate enough to have a collaborating partnership with Glenna and with Carol and with Susan Loving, who has left USB, in our partnership and looking at how we can help students in the transition plan, and also in that transition plan as students move from grade level to grade level, that those activities are related in collaboration with their instruction, their special ed teacher, and what does that look like in transition to make sure that students are successful as they move from grade level to grade level, but from school to school as well. So I think that in your recommendations, yes, we have addressed all of these, and we've made sure that the language changes is in here so they're very aware as they look at, and maybe too, let me back up, I'm making some jumps here, that just because that their annual audit, or excuse me, their formal review audit is every 6 years, they do an annual self-evaluation. So they're very aware of this intent language. And so they are having those conversations with, and I say they, the school counselors are having that conversation with their administrators around what they need to do to help support each and every student. So, I don't know if you've got questions, if I have addressed your concerns to the depth that you'd like, if you'd like me to talk more about that.
I have two things that I was hoping you could talk about briefly. I know that you guys have also supported the work of the SSIP or with school counselors. If you could talk briefly about that. And then we also did a quick legislative review, and I highlighted the pilot, the elementary school counselor pilot, and there was, I think, some interest in more information about that I didn't have with me.
Okay. As I last stated, sorry, we have, even within our own agency and the direction of Dr. Sid Dixon in superintendency, really have made some concerted efforts around cross collaboration within our agency. And what Glenn is referring to is we have built out some projects around our department in student advocacy services and special ed. One project is around looking at math at different levels and what does that look like for students with disabilities, and how we can support and work together to help our students be successful in the area of mathematics. So we've worked on that initiative. I'm trying to think of the pieces here. I think when you get a cold, your brain gets a little bit fried. I'm sorry. You know, and I mentioned Susan Loving's work in transition and working with her. Through that same collaboration and partnership, we have sponsored an annual conference, and special ed has been very gracious to help support that effort. And you know, collaboration with Carol Anderson here to make sure that we build those bridges to be able to support our students with disabilities a lot more than what we've had in the past. Do you want me to speak any more with that, or do you want me to move on to the pilot?
Do you guys have any questions?
Okay. So I'm tracking about 15 bills here. So I think the bill is House Bill 239 or 229, my apologies. But it first was listed as an elementary pilot program. And last Friday in the House, they moved that word pilot out. So it now becomes an elementary school program and no longer a pilot. It did change the language from one-time funding to ongoing. So very good news to help support our students at the elementary level. Right now in our state, our elementary school counseling ratio is 1 to 2,333 students. Yeah. So with the pilot, it is ongoing. It's only 1 million. I know 1 million sounds like a lot when you're an educator, but in education, it doesn't quite go as far as we would like. So the idea is to possibly, and again, this is just speculation. We'll know when the bill becomes finalized or passed. If it passes, we are very hopeful that and when I say hopeful, it's also a board priority, that if passed, we will work with board members to look at an application. We've had discussions around what's going on in Colorado. In Colorado, they have what's called the Counselor Corps. And with all of their school counseling, K-12, they have grants that last for 3 to 5 years. And the idea is to support a school for that time frame and hope that they are able to glean from data a successful program, and then to have the LEA or the school be able to sustain that program ongoing, and then support other schools. So the idea was you would have cohorts go through this funding stream for about 3 to 5 years and then pass along to another LEA or another school. So again, we're very hopeful. It is a board priority, but those are the updates around that particular bill. Well, I like it when you're quiet, then I won't have to cough so much.
Any other questions?
No, you can't have a ride on my Harley Davidson. Oh, okay. Nicole, you're up. No, thank you. I do want to say, if you don't have any other questions, I thank you for this time, and certainly feel free to reach out to me if you have concerns or questions. My number one priority is what can we do for our students, each and every one of them. We've been very diligent in our efforts at looking at disaggregated data when we visit our schools. And like I said, a lot of times it's our students with disabilities that we see that there's a greater need. And so we've been very direct in working with our school counselors to make sure that they are looking at different populations and how they can best serve their students. So I would love to hear from you if you have a concern.
Just a side note, for those of you that noticed I was possibly making faces as I pulled open this document that is a draft document with typos that's posted online. So we'll be fixing that. We're not quite sure how. It was not the content. It was the lack of editing that surprised me.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, moving on. Approval of the minutes. So if you could take a couple of minutes now, go through them, let me know if there are any changes that need to be made to the draft minutes.
This is a new process, but we'll be sharing these officially with the state board. So just make sure that you're okay with what they say.
Now everyone's going to look over them real closely, aren't you? All right, does anybody have any changes, issues with the meeting minutes as written? Otherwise, I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes as written.
I motion to approve the minutes as written.
Okay, do you have a second? Second. Okay, all in favor? Aye. All opposed? Any abstained? Excellent. All right, so the minutes are approved as written. Okay, so the next agenda item is discussing a need for a May 11th meeting. So, I guess the question was surrounding the topic areas that we've discussed and trying to determine whether we have enough within these priorities to warrant holding a meeting in May, correct?
Correct. If you do not hold a meeting in May, we do need to identify leadership moving forward into the summer. Mm-hmm. Right.
So it looks like, at least from the agendas that I've been going over, the one thing that that we sort of were saying was going to get moved to the next agenda was the task force recommendations. we don't have an idea of when those may be coming about. So it's possible that moving that to the summer meeting wouldn't be all that unheard of or wouldn't be problematic. People's thoughts about our priorities and things that we've done over the course of the year?
So if we had a May meeting, then they would cover, is that the task force on transition? That's what would be covered at that meeting then?
Well, that's pretty much the
hopefully.
one agenda item, at least that for the agenda items that I've gone over, that's getting bumped because we just don't have the information on it yet.
Could we set up the meeting and then if that isn't looks like it's not coming together, just cancel the meeting, but at least we'd have it in place in case it was available?
We could, or I mean, since that would be a May meeting, and typically we meet the end of June, correct? End of June, 1st of July. I guess my question would be, could we conceivably hold off on it for a month instead of doing meetings so relatively close together? I mean, I'm fine having a meeting either way. I'm not advocating for eliminating a meeting if we feel it's absolutely necessary, but just saying if it's something that we're going to talk about 6 weeks after.
Is that the only item?
Well, if you turn over your agenda, we had outlined our priorities. So issues surrounding youth in custody was one of them, the collaboration between general education and special education, and we did get more information on sort of the update with UMTSS and things like that, and then transition and early intervention. Some of these things have been ones that have sort of been addressed in previous years, but I guess my question and the question moving forward as far as trying to determine the need for a May meeting is, are there things that we still want to make sure that we're providing input on that we could create a meeting for in May?
I'm thinking the May meeting may not be necessary.
I was going to say, I'm not
Anybody
getting
else?
a lot of enthusiasm
I know, I'm
about
like,
it. No, darn it, we need to have that.
I'll be the bad guy. I motion to move that one topic to our end of June monthly meeting.
And then eliminate the May meeting.
And then eliminate the May meeting.
Before I second, my question is, how would we take care of the nominations for vacancies on the panel?
Would that be something that would be feasible to do that online?
Because if we normally would have done it at the last meeting of the year, which would, if we cancel the May meeting, that would be today.
Right.
We can do that through email, and then also remember that the board changed the process and they make the final decisions. So you guys put forth a recommendation, and then the board decides. But we can do that through email.
Then,
Which position or how many people are they looking for? Can we start telling people that we know if they would like to apply, or how does that work?
Yes, we're not sure yet, but we'll go through and see whose terms are ending and send all of that. We didn't come prepared today for that conversation. I apologize. Only the other 12 conversations.
And what happens if your term is ending but you want to keep going? You resubmit or?
Yes, so we'll send out the bylaws, which allow you to serve, I believe, one more additional term. I'll have to double check, but we'll send that out also.
And then if your child is turning 22, then your child has to be under 22 to be on.
I believe it actually is 26.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's 26.
okay, I second the motion to not hold the May 11th meeting.
Okay. All in favor? Anyone opposed? Abstained? All right. Well, then it sounds as though we'll be moving that discussion about the task force recommendation to the summer meeting. We'll move the nominations and the nomination process online. There was something else that I thought of, and now it's gone. So yeah, thank you. God, you're hearing me. So we need to figure out a date for the June meeting or end of July or beginning of July meeting. So given that it's usually based around Glenna's schedule, I'll wait until you have.
I would like to start with June 23rd.
Works for me. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Get out. It's never that easy. So, all right. I was going to say, well, if you're the one coming in, it's kind of important that you're there.
You can make it. June 23rd, 9 to 3 p.m. Okay. So at that meeting, we'll talk about recommendations from the State Board of Education around graduation options for students with disabilities. We'll also set priorities, review Robert's Rules of Order, continue updates from our partners, the Utah Parent Center, Voc Rehab, Juvenile Justice, and Part C, Early Intervention. And then have some reporting out of USBE updates and do a staff review and introduction. So at this point, Maggie will be exiting, and we're sorry we're not prepared with a gift, so we'll do gifts and recognition at the summer retreat. And Mallory will be coming in as the chair, and so if it pleases the group, if we could talk elections for vice chair for next year.
Sure. So, who's stepping up? Do we have nominations? People who really feel enthusiastic about wanting to become chair, not this coming year, but next year?
I nominate Janelle Locke.
Janelle, how do you feel about it before you get sort of railroaded into it?
I'm just thinking in my head to see when my second term would up, but I think I do have 2 years left, so.
So you go out on top.
Yeah. Because I think this is my first year of my second term, so.
Okay, Emily's going to look really quick.
Excellent, thank you.
That would be my only hesitation is when my second term is.
Glenna, is that going to be a problem? I know I need to reapply for my position. I was told that I would be able to reapply for my second term.
Right.
Will that be a problem before the June meeting?
It shouldn't
Okay.
be. If it is, we'll recruit.
Okay.
Okay, Janelle's term doesn't end until June 2019.
Okay.
So that would be okay with Mallory.
Mallory, we're going to double check.
June 30th of this year.
So you'll have to reapply.
But you'll be okay for the June meeting because your term doesn't end until June 30th.
There you go.
Any more nominations?
Do we need any more?
No.
I thought we were pretty low as far as the number of people who run this thing.
An official vote?
All right, so we had seconds and whatnot for Janelle. So all in favor of Janelle being vice chair? Aye. All opposed? Abstained? Excellent. So Janelle, congratulations. And Mallory, congratulations. Pending, of course, that you get re-upped, which if you don't, then we'll sort of figure that out from there. Then maybe, Janelle, you're actually going to be, bumped a lot earlier. Because isn't it the rule that if the president can't, then the vice president? Well, there you go. Okay. Exactly. For Robert's rules, yeah. Well, because I've been using them so well, I had to be reminded to use them. So I think that's been much of a concern. Pretty easygoing group here as far as Robert's rules. Okay. Is there anything else that needs to be discussed? Things that people need to make sure get covered before we leave for today? Now, if you didn't hear, it is Nicole's 16th birthday, and she is here sitting in a meeting all day on her birthday. So I think that deserves a round of applause, absolutely. And she's going to go have sushi, which I wish I could say I was jealous, but I'm not because I think fish are. But I'm thrilled that you like it, so good for you. All right, so I will entertain a motion to end the meeting.
I motion that we adjourn our meeting.
Okay, second?
I second the motion.
All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Excellent. I need a gavel so I can say the meeting's done. Excellent. Thank you, everyone.